This video is going to be about something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, but given this is my first video essay on YouTube, I figure I need to get a few of the must-do topics out of the way to establish my credibility. So here we go. Sonic had a rough transition into 3D, and Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are bad and you're wrong for liking them. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I went from making fun of video essays about Sonic Adventure to, well, making this video essay about Sonic Adventure. To be honest, I'm wondering the exact same thing. It all started a couple of weeks ago. I had just finished up the Pokemon and Apathy video, which for those of you who haven't seen it, was basically just a 30-minute trip down memory lane for me. I talked a lot about my childhood and how Pokemon related to it and played a role in it. Pokemon was always the obsession, from my youngest years to the recent past. But it was never alone. Pokemon had a hidden companion further in the past, one that I didn't bring up because there wasn't really a place for it in that video. That companion was Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, my fallout with Sonic came much earlier than with Pokemon. Sonic's dark age and the surrounding discussion online was already in full swing by the time I had internet access. I was practically raised on videos ranting about Sonic 06 and Sonic and the Secret Rings. Being the impressionable young kid I was, I let those reviews color my perception. And even though I still liked games like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Generations as they came out, my general attitude towards Sonic was set by the time I was in middle school. Sonic was a franchise in decline, and the good old days were behind him. But what exactly were those good old days? Well, being a child of the early 2000s, it wasn't the classic era games. I had Sonic Mega Collection, sure, but I thought all of those games were a lot less fun than the main event. No, for me, the good old days of Sonic were 3 games: Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, and Sonic Heroes. To me, these games were untouchable masterpieces, and to this day I'm still incredibly nostalgic for them. That being said, it's been a long time since I've touched any of them. Nearly a decade at least. So, with nostalgia fresh on my brain, I decided I'd spend my weekend in replaying my beloved Sonic Adventure. I bought it on Steam, kicked back, and smiled that comfy nostalgia smile as the intro cutscene began. I even opened up OBS to capture some footage. I figured it might make a fun video defending Sonic Adventure from its detractors, and explaining why it's the absolute classic I remembered it as. Maybe I could even use said video as a vehicle to ask you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content. Maybe leave a comment for the algorithm, support me on Patreon, and other subtle subliminal messages I could sneak in there very sneakily. But that idea to make a video in defense of Sonic Adventure never came to fruition. Strangely, with every step I took, with every minute that separated me from that awesome intro cutscene, I found the smile fading, morphing into a look of confusion, and eventually settling on a blank stare of bemusement. It wasn't long before I wasn't really having fun anymore, but then it hit me. I started to smile again. A far cheesier grin than before, even. After this brief hiccup, I was back to not just having fun, but having an absolute blast. A Sonic 3D blast, if you will. Had I rediscovered it? That je ne sais quoi? The secret sauce that makes Sonic Adventure the masterpiece that I remember? No, not at all. What really happened was that I finally realized, thanks to the unstoppable march of time, Sonic Adventure is not the great game I remember. But it's bad in just the perfect way to be hilarious, while still maintaining just enough positives to remain barely competent and engaging beyond irony. Sonic Adventure is terrible. It has aged like yogurt in the sun, and I love it. Now, I can't just spit out a somewhat divisive take like that and not back it up, so it looks like I've trapped myself into an obnoxiously long review of a 26-year-old game about a blue rat. Over the next... how long is this? Over the next 3 hours, I'll be breaking this game down and discussing it from beginning to end, dissecting it and critiquing it from a modern perspective. Time to give the old, long-dead horse of Sonic Adventure discourse one last solid kick before it's reduced to its component atoms. Well, when in Rome. Say it with me, ladies and gentlemen. Sonic had a rough transition into 3D. Okay, hold on. Let's actually rewind a little bit and talk about that intro cutscene, because holy shit, this rocked my world as a kid. Up until this point, the games I played had intros like, "Oh, look at you riding your bike with all these Pokemon friends," or "Mario sure does want that succulent seafood." All this and more. Then Sonic Adventure opens up with an entire city of people fucking dying. I mean, look at this shit. There were people just out walking and driving, not to mention all the people in these buildings. All of these people just drowned if their skull wasn't bashed in by a rogue manhole cover. Those things are like cast iron. They're heavy. After the title flashes on screen, shit gets really intense, with this percussion that almost sounds like jets of water as we see the further destruction of the city. There's a falling island and flashes of something running through a jungle. This shit was crazy to my 5-year-old mind. It all culminates in this shot of this freaky amorphous water serpent oozing out of the building and making R2-D2 noises. Then the intro jumps right back into that water jet percussion, now including an electric guitar in the mix for extra intensity, as we finally see our leading man, Sonic the Hedgehog. He's in a rush, he's in a hurry, probably having something to do with this sick airship rising from the jungle like a massive predator. And finally, all of that build-up pays off when the lyrics cut in. Obviously, I'm not a kid anymore, so this intro doesn't hit quite as hard as it used to. It was my first taste of a game really taking itself seriously, so it took my young brain by surprise. With an adult perspective though, I have to say, this intro is actually still pretty good. The first quiet part really establishes the stakes, showing you a peaceful world before it all comes crashing down in one big oh shit moment, as the game introduces itself. Then we watch in horror as that oh shit moment unfolds further into absolute disaster, building tension with the visuals and the music until we get hit with an oh fuck moment as Chaos's head pops out. Somehow, despite having two such huge payoffs so far, the tension is still on the rise after it cuts back to Sonic running through the jungle with even more intense build-up, finally culminating in one final payoff at the end of it. The difference with this payoff as the main theme cuts in is that it's not an oh shit or an oh fuck moment, it's an oh hell yes moment that lasts like 30 seconds, expeditiously showing off the game's main characters in such a way that makes them all look interesting. Look again at this shot of Eggman just standing atop his flying fortress like a king with his mustache rippling in the wind. He gives off this aura of absolute control and confidence. This intro is so effective at establishing the tone and stakes of this game. Keep in mind, Sonic games before this had very little in the way of story. You know, something along the lines of, oh, stop Eggman and get the Chaos Emeralds. In comparison, this game goes full on. Speaking of stories, this game has 6 of them. Well, really it only has one story, but it has 6 playable characters that each experience the story from their own campaigns with varying degrees of involvement. Some of them are essential to the overarching plot, while some of them, you know what, we'll get to it. The most fleshed out, of course, is our boy Sonic, and he also happens to be the first one you unlock, so let's go through him first, shall we?
Let's get him!
Our story begins with Sonic hopping around Station Square's rooftops. You'll notice that despite it being the middle of the night, Sonic is shining like a Twilight vampire. Get used to it, this game's lighting engine sucks. So let's talk about this now and get ahead of it. Yes, I am playing Sonic Adventure DX, not the Dreamcast original. I don't have a Dreamcast, and that version, to my knowledge, hasn't been released since. I grew up with DX on the GameCube, and DX is the only version Sega has ever bothered porting. I know a lot of people prefer the Dreamcast version, and for good reason. The port job is more than a little shoddy. Like, seriously, for the most part, they destroyed this game graphically. Consequently, this leads to some DX exclusive issues like the bad lighting. I won't be picking on the graphics much because of this, but for the sake of clarity, this is a review of the Steam port of Sonic Adventure DX. If I say something that doesn't apply to the Dreamcast version or another port, I'm sorry. If Sega gave a shit about preserving their game, we'd have a better port of the Dreamcast version by now. Anyways, ugly DX Sonic finds himself facing down a mysterious goopy creature named Chaos as his first bit of gameplay. Now, I know the intellectually superior and objectively correct 900 IQ video essayist opinion here is that starting with a boss fight is bad, since it's apparently a legal and moral imperative for games to start like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time by dropping you in fucking daycare, but come on, this fight is a joke. Chaos's attacks are all extremely telegraphed, and there are plenty of rings scattered around to keep you healthy if this is like your first video game or something. This fight isn't one of those scripted set-piece fights, but it really might as well be in practice. It's not like Sonic Adventure is full of deep and complex mechanics. You can beat this fight with the control stick and the A button. That's one level of complexity above the first level in Super Monkey Ball. I think this whole sequence is really cool. I love this shot of the police's bullets just harmlessly falling out of Chaos's body before Sonic shows up. It really gives Chaos this sense of menace. It immediately establishes that this threat is beyond humans, and that's why we need a hero like Sonic to step in. That said, I don't really get why human weapons are useless while Sonic can just jump into Chaos a few times to take him out, but I digress. Beyond that, Sonic's big drip line after this fight is iconic.
Come on, you big drip! Where you going?
And Eggman's little monologue from the roof for some reason. How did the cops not see him? Anyway, the monologue sets up this air of mystery around the whole ordeal. I don't know, 6-year-old me really wanted to know more after this, and adult me can appreciate the intrigue. With Chaos Zero dispatched, the next morning Sonic saves Tails from a plane crash via his first action stage, Emerald Coast.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
Emerald Coast is a really interesting level, because I think it's a perfect little microcosm of everything that is both right and wrong with Sonic's gameplay in Sonic Adventure. It begins with this wide open area with plenty of space to run around, a few non-threatening enemies, and rings to grab if you're willing to explore. In these wider open areas, Sonic feels great to control. The spin dash lets you rocket off in any direction you want on a whim, and the homing attack gives you an easy way to overcome Sonic's speed to easily dispatch enemies on the move. Once you have the lay of the land, you can move on to this boardwalk where you'll run straight into these rubber bands if you're going too fast. To me, these have always felt like a way of softly introducing the idea of high-speed precision. You need to be careful when you're running, but for now, rather than throwing you off of a ledge into the abyss, the game gently and playfully bounces you back the other direction. This level just keeps throwing fun things to do at you. The Orca Chase is iconic. That part where you rocket up a hill and cross over a lighthouse to the second half of the level is a nice transition. And that part where you can run up the wall into this small alternate path that nets you a shortcut and a 1-up is really rewarding. Emerald Coast is fast, snappy, and full to bursting with creative ideas. It's everything good about Sonic distilled to its essence and delivered beautifully. But if you take a closer look, there are also glimpses of Sonic Adventure's ever-present jank in this level. The game will sometimes really awkwardly and noticeably grab control away from you in an extremely inorganic way to railroad you through a scripted set piece. Sometimes the game will try to do this, but then fail miserably because you tilted the control stick in a way it didn't like, so you'll jerk to a halt and snap on and off the path the game wants you on at random. I've even fallen through floors and walls because of this. And to top it all off, sometimes you'll round a corner too fast and the camera will just absolutely lose it. As a first level, Emerald Coast leaves a great impression, but the seeds are planted here for problems that will only get worse as the game progresses. Upon rescuing Tails, we get a cutscene that beautifully demonstrates this game's storytelling. Tails' dialogue sounds like it's stitched together from a bunch of isolated sentences, almost like something out of a YouTube poop.
Yep, I just happened to find one of the 7 emeralds during one of my test fights. This thing's got unlimited power, you know. So I figured, why not use it to power my plane? Supercharged!
Smash Brothers for Wii U is a board game.
This isn't just this cutscene either, dialogue is like this for the whole game. In fact, I think I've seen YouTube poops more coherent than your average Sonic Adventure cutscene. It kinda gives Morshu reads the entire Bible vibes. Compounding the dialogue issue, the music is also usually very loud. So while you're watching Tails speak like you just discovered the concept of sentences, you just have this woman screeching in your ear about flying and believing in yourself. Get used to this. This is a pretty good template for what just about every cutscene in this game is going to look like. But yeah, anyways, Tails tells Sonic he has to come see his workshop in the Mystic Ruins, which leads nicely into adventure areas, this game's hub worlds. The adventure areas serve as connective tissue between levels and as a staging ground for cutscenes. There are 3 of these areas in Sonic Adventure, and they're all pretty big for the time and full of interesting things to find. Station Square, for example, is home to tons of NPCs that all have interesting little bits of flavor text that make the world feel more alive. Some of these NPCs even have story arcs, the most well-known of which is the part where the railway workers go on strike to restrict your movement during certain parts of the game. There are plenty of nooks and crannies to explore all over the map, all of which are hiding exciting little additions like power-ups, emblems, or rare Chao eggs. And to top it all off, adventure areas are an absolute blast to move around in for most characters. These wide open spaces are where Sonic's speed allows for the most freedom and flexibility. There are entire levels in this game that are less fun to move around in than Mystic Ruins, and I mean that both as a compliment to the adventure areas and as an insult towards this game's worst levels. Speaking of Mystic Ruins, here at Tails' workshop we fight the next boss, the Egg Hornet. A lot of boss fights in this game fall into one of my 2 patented Soda Crab Sonic Adventure boss categories: absolute jokes or waiting simulators. This boss, at least Sonic's version of it, is the rare boss that dodges the scale and falls into both of these categories. The basic idea of this fight is that you run around in circles and dodge Eggman's missile barrage while you wait for him to do his one attack that makes him vulnerable. Usually you would expect to get 1 hit per time he makes himself vulnerable, which is true of every other waiting simulator boss in this game. But what pushes him into the joke category is that for some reason you can just mash the homing attack against him and get all 3 hits from 1 vulnerability, one cycling him in 30 seconds. After being defeated, Eggman kinda just sits in the air vibrating and making weird cartoon squelch sound effects. Tails moonwalks in place, Chaos Emerald in hand, of course. Naturally, this is exactly the opportunity Eggman was waiting for, so he sends out a comically slow robot claw to grab it from Tails' hands, to which Sonic the Hedgehog, the fastest thing alive, reacts by saying, "Oh no!" and standing there doing absolutely nothing. It's then revealed that Eggman's plan is to collect all of the Chaos Emeralds and feed them to Chaos, the goopy water monster, to presumably turn him into the giant monster we saw in the intro. Chaos evolves every time he's fed an emerald, and I always loved seeing all of his different forms. They always looked so cool to me growing up. Unfortunately, you don't actually get to see 8 different forms of Chaos. Eggman often feeds Chaos 2 emeralds at once, so he skips a few stages. We never see Chaos 3 or 5 in the game, and you don't get to fight Chaos 1 even though he's fully modeled in this cutscene. You'd think the game would use the opportunity provided by multiple stories to show us every form, but no, only one other character gets a unique Chaos fight. From here on, the stage is set. It's a race between Sonic and Eggman to collect the Chaos Emeralds. To that end, we head over to the next action stage, Windy Valley. You can't just walk in though, you have to unlock it first. All you have to do is grab this green stone from Tails' workshop and carry it over to this windy cave. Pretty simple and honestly kinda pointless. Surely the puzzle-solving mechanic being introduced here will become more complex in its subsequent uses. Windy Valley is another solid stage, but it starts to lean a lot more into some of that jank we discussed earlier with Emerald Coast. Windy Valley is the first level to really lean into the homing attack mechanics, and as an introduction, it works fine, especially in showing that sometimes it will just decide not to work. Look, the homing attack is really awesome and was a genius solution to the problem of fighting enemies in 3D space, but like everything in Sonic Adventure, it's not exactly perfect yet. On a more positive note, I love the theming of Windy Valley. It has great set pieces like the tornado that darkens the level as you approach it, or the winding paths through the brilliant blue sky in the second half of the level. But while the theming is great, this level is full of jank. It doesn't quite ruin everything, but it really throws off the flow of the second half. There are parts of this level where the game really seems like it wants to take control from me and have me run along a set path for cinematic effect, and when it tries, it's bad at it. It feels very clumsy and upsets the pacing of this part of the level, which is a shame because when the game is working, this high-speed romp through the sky feels fantastic. Windy Valley is another level emblematic of Sonic's campaign. High highs and great ideas, just barely held back by a few problems that in their totality bring the experience down a bit. Back in Station Square, we have to pick up a power-up before we can move on to the next level. This is our first introduction to the Light Dash, an ability that allows Sonic to seamlessly dash through a line of rings at the press of a button. Or at least that's what it does in every other game it appears in. This was the Light Dash's first appearance, so they didn't quite have that seamless bit worked out yet. In this game, you have to hold down the B button for about 4 seconds to charge up this weird blue aura, and release it to Light Dash. This takes what should be a really cool ability, one that can really complement a level's tempo, and turns it into something that slows the pace to a crawl anytime it's needed. It feels less like a cool addition to Sonic's moveset and more like a key specifically needed to unlock the next level. That next level is Casinopolis, where Sonic can finally indulge in his crippling gambling addiction. I don't really like this level at all, at least not as Sonic, but credit where credit is due. Casinopolis is oozing with atmosphere and creativity. The music really sells that classy, high-rolling feel, and the main hub of this level is full of interesting details to discover. Like, look at this, you can walk into the bathroom and watch Tails watch Sonic take a shower. Now, as I said before, this level has a central hub, which makes it unique among Sonic levels in this game. You start out in this wide-open casino full of slot machines, statues, and even some rooms off to the side. In one of the offshoot rooms, you can find the Chaos Emerald, sitting just out of reach beyond an invisible wall. In order to reach it, you'll have to collect 400 rings to build a pile of money up to it like you're fucking Scrooge McDuck. You get these rings by playing one of 2 pinball tables, and that's where this level kind of falls apart for me. These tables way overstay their welcome. Whether you're playing the Sonic-themed slot pinball or the Knights-themed card pinball, you're going to be stuck on them for about 10 minutes. Now, I've played a lot of pinball in my day, and let me tell you, these are really boring tables. I get that Sonic Adventure isn't a pinball game, so I can't expect super high-quality pinball tables, but this sucks, man. There's really not a whole lot going on here. In the slots one, you just want to send Sonic into the slot hole over and over again. And in the Knights one, you just want to get to this secret table, occasionally getting stuck in these obnoxiously long animations. Sonic has had casino levels almost as long as the series has existed, so the presence of a level with pinball mechanics isn't a bad thing. The problem here is that rather than integrating pinball mechanics into the level, they just do the most literal interpretation of a pinball level and make you play an actual shitty pinball table. For an example of this done better, Sonic Heroes has casino levels with pinball elements, but they don't just throw you into an actual pinball table. The pinball tables are part of the level geometry itself. You're traversing them to reach the goal. Sonic Adventure literally just makes you play pinball until you get a high enough score. It just doesn't work for me. Bottom line here is that if I wanted to play pinball, I'd play a pinball game. The devs made the mistake of adding Sonic to pinball instead of adding pinball to Sonic. There is a real action stage portion of Casinopolis, but it's accessed by losing at pinball with a low amount of collected rings. Given that the pinball tables are brain dead easy and you have 3 balls, you'll pretty much never see this section as Sonic. Thankfully, you get to play through this exact section later as Tails, so we'll skip it for now and talk about it with him. Sonic and Tails exit the casino with their newly acquired emerald, but unfortunately, Eggman is one step ahead. Eggman hits Sonic and Tails with a deadly nerve agent, stealing the Chaos Emerald and killing them instantly. The next stage is located back at the Mystic Ruins, but in order to access it, you'll have to solve a puzzle. This game's idea of a puzzle is absolutely hilarious. The second you load back into Station Square, you see Cream the Rabbit flying from an alleyway, and also she's extremely visually bugged in the Steam version for some reason. You go check the alley and find an ice stone, similar to the wind stone used to unlock Windy Valley. Okay, cool, expanding on an established mechanic, great. When you pick it up, it tells you to use it in the Mystic Ruins. Okay, that's a pretty big hint, but Mystic Ruins is huge. Surely it'll take a little bit of exploration to figure out And you place it directly next to the giant blue ice door located in the cave that just spontaneously blew out for you. Welcome to Ice Cap! This level is a weird one. It's a mixed bag for sure, but even the good parts have some caveats, kinda like a bag of trail mix, but every M&M is wrapped in cat hair. It starts with a climb up the mountain with this really soothing ambient music. One thing that immediately sucks in Ice Cap is the icicles. The level just screeches to a halt as Sonic slowly sidles around on these things and jumps off in the opposite direction. This mechanic could work well with a slower paced character like Amy, but it runs so contrary to what Sonic's levels are all about. Now, I'm not saying Sonic needs to be moving at full speed all the time. I know it's like the cardinal sin of talking about Sonic on the internet, but maintaining some sort of forward momentum is essential for any good Sonic level, at least to me, and this just isn't it. When you enter the mountain proper, the level becomes focused on vertical platforming. You have to make your way up towards the summit from the inside. The music here is this almost kinda spooky, icy song. It would sound really nice and emphasize the precarious nature of the climb, were it not for this obnoxious sound effect that is constantly radiating from somewhere in the level. Seriously, I've played this game dozens of times over the years, and I still don't know where this sound is coming from. It is incredibly loud because of this game's poor sound mixing, so it ends up making this section really unpleasant. It's unfortunate because this part is otherwise really interesting. The vertical platforming isn't particularly fast, but there's a constant forward and upward motion that is mostly unrestricted, aside from the aforementioned icicles, of course. The second half of this level begins at the summit, as Sonic hops on a snowboard and slides away from an avalanche. The controls here definitely aren't perfect, it feels janky as hell, and this mode could have definitely done with some more polish, but even being cynical, it's an absolute blast. Crashing through the ice, flying through the air with ramps, dodging enemy missiles. It's great fun. There's jank, because of course there is, it's Sonic Adventure, but it's hard not to smile playing through this section even when the game throws you into a wall and turns you around. Both through its aesthetic and its gameplay, this section feels very earnestly Sonic, especially with that jazzy rock music in the background. The visuals here are really interesting too. These little villages with the windmills and hot air balloons really make you think about what life is like for the people up here. It has that same kind of surreal feeling as the background of a Super Monkey Ball level. With 2 emeralds now in hand, Sonic and Tails have a brief encounter with Knuckles, who for one reason or another want Sonic's emeralds. This is the first of a few character fights in this game where you battle against the other playable characters with their actual movesets. This sounds like it could be really cool, but on my patented Soda Crab Sonic Adventure boss scale, these fights skew so heavily to the pathetic end that I had to reinforce that side of the scale to keep it from snapping the damn thing in half. They kinda just stand there and let you hit them 3 times. Including loading times, this Knuckles fight is over in less than 10 seconds. So the emeralds fly out of Sonic's ass and are intercepted by Eggman, who orchestrated this whole thing by tricking Knuckles. Eggman feeds the emeralds to Chaos, and now you have the pleasure of fighting Chaos 4 for the first of 3 times. This is probably the worst boss fight in the game. I made the mistake of preemptively reinforcing only the pathetic side of the boss scale in anticipation for the character fights, but forgot that Chaos 4 is just as extreme but on the waiting simulator end. That side of the scale has now snapped and the whole damn thing is in ruins, so no more rankings for this video. Thanks Chaos 4. This fight is so stupid. You just stand here in the water and jump around while you wait for Chaos to finish his absolutely flaccid attack patterns before he makes himself vulnerable for no discernible reason. Like what, is he coming up for air? He's literally made of water. Speaking of water, you'd think the challenge of this fight would be landing on the lily pads to avoid falling in, but no, the water here is strangely solid. It has more of a quicksand quality to it. You only start to sink if you stand on it for too long. I think the idea here was to simulate that Sonic can run fast over water, but they didn't program any kind of speed requirement, so the water is just gelatinous, like you're standing in Jell-O. Chaos actually does have attacks where he singles out specific lily pads, so it seems like the original intent was to have you waiting on them. It's a shame, because that could actually have made for a more tense and interesting boss fight, with Chaos sharking around underwater, ready to strike the moment you let your guard down. What a bizarre and horribly executed boss fight, and you get the absolute pleasure of doing this fight with both Tails and Knuckles as well in their campaigns. When you finally finish that slog, Eggman and Chaos escape into Eggman's flying fortress, the Egg Carrier. We get a really awesome pre-rendered cutscene introducing it. The Egg Carrier has this really menacing air to it. The roar of its engines almost sound like this eldritch breathing. The Egg Carrier is a terrifying presence in this cutscene. The game then cuts back to the in-engine cutscenes to show us this beautiful low-poly Egg Carrier model with just the grainiest textures I have ever seen. Seriously, I know this game is old, and I'm playing the port with worse graphics. That's why I haven't really given it shit for its imperfect visuals, but even by this game's standards, this just looks terrible, and it's hard not to notice such immediate and stark juxtaposition. Sonic and Tails give chase in what is widely considered one of the absolute worst sections of the game, Sky Chase, a really milquetoast on-rails plane shooter that you have to play 4 fucking times throughout the game. Thankfully, in a stroke of absolute genius by the dev team, you don't actually have to play it. If you just move the plane to the top right, you won't get hit by anything, and the level will end by itself in about 3 minutes. I like to use this as an opportunity to use the bathroom or grab a drink. It's kind of like those messages built into some 3DS games where if you're playing for too long it tells you to get a life and go outside. Except here, instead of suggesting it, Sonic Adventure flawlessly shows off its ludonarrative discipline by actively integrating built-in touching grass time during gameplay. Sonic Team was really ahead of their time with this. After getting shot out of the sky because they tried to take on what is basically a flying aircraft carrier with a single biplane, the duo is separated. Sonic lands on the beach in Station Square with a cartoon falling sound effect and dies instantly on contact with the ground. Okay, but really, I've always loved this stupid cutscene.
Tails? Tails! You're not who I'm looking for. Oh, I wonder if he's okay.
Something about the Tails always gets me, and the way he just randomly tells off this little girl is great too. Like, who is this? Why is she here? Why does Sonic feel the need to diss her like that? I don't know, it's great. Sonic has a chance encounter with Amy in Station Square and gets roped into visiting the next action stage, Twinkle Park. I remember enjoying the stage a lot back in the day. Unfortunately, after this playthrough, my opinion has changed drastically. I don't know if it's issues with the PC port or what, because I don't remember this happening on GameCube, but there are just tons of weird little technical problems that destroy what could otherwise be a really great level. First of all, in this neat little bumper cars section at the beginning, I was having a great time until the game randomly killed me for going off this ramp. I don't know what I did wrong. I was holding forward and accelerating. It definitely didn't feel like my fault. I don't know. Maybe I'm stupid. But the big problem arose when I entered the level proper. This awful sound just started blasting into my headphones when I rode in on the roller coaster, overpowering the music and every other sound effect, not stopping until I finished the level. I don't know what this sound effect is supposed to be for. I don't know if it's a glitch or what, but it was present in every version of Twinkle Park, so this wasn't a one-off issue. This level was actively, physically painful to play, and I mean that quite literally. It's a shame, because for the most part, the level design here is excellent. There's this cool bowling minigame that rewards you with rings, wide open spaces to run around, side areas to explore, and an awesome platforming section at the end. The aesthetic here is wonderful and the music is great. It's a shame it's completely ruined by whatever is going on with the sound mixing. Pretty much immediately after Twinkle Park, you're thrown into Speed Highway. This level is probably Sonic Adventure's most iconic level. I mean, for me, it was always Red Mountain, but I don't know, they didn't ask little old me when they were developing Sonic Generations. Speed Highway is full of fast-paced platforming, snappy combat sections, and cool set pieces like this part where you ride the bottom of a helicopter. Don't get me wrong, it has its fair share of Sonic Adventure jank, but it's just such a joy to run through that the rough edges are easy to overlook. It all culminates in this awesome moment where Sonic is running down the side of a skyscraper, dodging helicopters, pipes, and outcroppings before finally crashing through a skylight. This momentum that Speed Highway has kind of fizzles out at the end though. Upon exiting the building whose ceiling you just crashed through, you emerge into this open, relaxed downtown area. This area always puzzled me as a kid because it doesn't feel like a level designed for Sonic. It always felt more like something that would fit better in Mario Sunshine. I always wished I could spend more time here and really explore it. I now know that this section feels out of place and like it's not designed for Sonic because, well, it's out of place and not designed for Sonic. It's a wide open area that feels like it's meant to be explored in Knuckles' campaign, but I suppose they just threw it in here at the end of Sonic's version of Speed Highway to pad out the level a bit more. Or who knows, maybe I'm wrong and this is all just a really bizarre section that happens to work for Knuckles. After Speed Highway, Sonic finally catches up with Amy. Unfortunately, Eggman's robot caught her first, and it took her up to the egg carrier. To give chase, Sonic heads over to the next action stage, Red Mountain, but not before picking up a new power-up. This power-up, the Ancient Light, gives Sonic a special attack out of his Light Dash state. The Ancient Light pretty much exclusively acts as a key to Red Mountain. It's the only way to kill the enemy that's preventing you from entering. Other than that, it's virtually useless. In fact, a lot of power-ups in this game are like this. Knuckles gets a similar power-up that charges with the B button and is completely worthless. Amy gets this dumb spin hammer thing that is objectively worse than every other move in her arsenal and leaves her wide open to attack. Padding and superfluous content are a huge problem with this game, and these upgrades that do little to nothing are symptoms of that large overarching problem. But you know what isn't a problem? Red Mountain. I fucking love this level. The music here goes absolutely insane. That saxophone and brass that eventually give in to that jazzy piano just... oh fuck, it's so good. It makes me want to go shut off my computer and go climb like a real ass mountain. Along with the music, this level plays great too. It features tons of vertical platforming while still maintaining a great sense of speed and forward momentum. Yeah, the monkey bars can slow the pace down a little bit, but you can jump off them whenever you want, and even avoid them entirely with enough skill. Unlike something like Ice Cap's icicles, they're more of a crutch for newer players than an obstacle to an experienced player's flow. Halfway through the level, Sonic jumps down a hatch into the volcanic interior of the mountain. I'm not gonna lie to you, this part of the level scared the ever-loving shit out of me as a kid. The music goes from that upbeat jazzy track that I love so much to this eerie and intense track that almost sounds kinda like screaming. And this part here with these mysterious creatures stuck in jail gave 6-year-old me nightmares. It also doesn't help that there are creepy spider creatures littered all over the place. As an adult though, I can say that this part of the level is pretty good. I prefer the first half purely because I love the music so much, but the tricky lava platforming and high-speed hallways where you have to dodge fire-breathing skulls make for a high-tension and fun conclusion to a fantastic level. Tails happens to meet up with Sonic at the mountain's peak in a shiny new blue plane. Sonic hops aboard and the two chase after the egg carrier. In the sky. A sky chase, if you will. Sky Chase Act 2. Just like with Act 1, you can skip the entire thing by sitting in the top right corner, but unfortunately you'll have to make your bathroom break short, because at the end of this act, there's actually a brief boss fight versus the egg carrier. It's not hard, you're just waiting around for it to open up its weak point, then shooting at it, but kudos to the devs here. You do actually have to play the level. Upon beating Sky Chase, Sonic and Tails experience history's most flaccid plane crash and officially arrive at the third adventure area, the egg carrier.
Wow! This thing is really huge!
No time to talk now. We need to find Amy.
Before you can make it very far though, Eggman transforms the vessel and impedes your progress.
You haven't seen the power this vessel really has! Get a load of this!
The only way forward now is through the next stage, Sky Deck. I wonder where you can find the Sky Deck. Looks like this might be the entrance to the Sky Deck. What do you think, Sonic?
This must be the way to the sky deck.
That's what I'm saying! While we're on the subject of Sky Deck, holy fuck, this stage blows. Its main gimmick for the first half of the level is climbing around on these pillars really slowly and awkwardly. It also features a complaint that I've brought up plenty of times now. Really bad scripting of scripted sections. Watch as I fight to climb up this pathway that the game is very clumsily trying to help me up. I appreciate the good intentions here, game, but you're really hurting me more than you're helping. Going down this next one is only slightly less uncomfortable. The stage's first half concludes with more awkward pillar sidling and ladder climbing as you make your way to a rocket that destroys a cannon. The next part of Sky Deck is actually pretty good though. You get transported to this big, wide open area where you have to move forward while dodging explosions, fighter jets, and the collapsing floor. It's great for that sense of speed and control that Sky Deck is sorely lacking in its first half. It culminates in the destruction of another cannon with a rocket, which once again teleports Sonic somewhere else. This time, unfortunately, the level's quality drops off a cliff. The interior portion of Sky Deck is Sonic Adventure at its jankiest. They try to do something cool by changing the egg carrier's tilt, but it's executed really poorly and makes for uncomfortable platforming and tons of jank. One would think that with changing elevations and slopes galore, this section would at least be ripe for cheesing with the spin dash, but no. Fuck you. As you can see here, I spot the capsule off in the distance and decide to end the level with a well-timed spin dash jump. Unfortunately, the game has other ideas. My reward for this creativity is this. Now, to its credit, when you do it as intended, this section of the level does mostly function, but like the rest of this interior portion, it's still extremely jank-prone. I don't like Sky Deck one bit, but hey, if you're gonna be bad, at least be funny, and I personally think that this is pretty funny. With the Sky Deck in the rearview mirror, we now have access to the egg carrier proper. There's not much to do here at the moment other than head back to the surface, but in general the egg carrier is a much more cramped location than the other two adventure areas. Movement is far more restricted, and significant parts of the ship are often cordoned off depending on what's going on in the story. It does have some really interesting things to discover that are absolutely oozing with personality though, like Eggman's pool or the hidden Chao Garden, so I think it ends up balancing out. It may not be as fun to romp around in as the Mystic Ruins, and it may not have as many things to find as Station Square, but the egg carrier is densely packed with interesting details. Back up on the deck, Sonic finally finds Amy and jumps in to rescue her from Eggman. Eggman steals a Chaos Emerald from Amy's pet bird and calls on his robot, E102 Gamma. Time for another character fight. That lasts about as long as you would expect. Before Sonic can finish Gamma off, Amy very slowly and awkwardly shuffles in front of him to heroically save the robot's life. From there, the egg carrier starts losing altitude, which I've never quite understood. Nothing really happens to it that could have caused it to crash. It was still functional after Sonic and Tails took out the main cannon, and aside from taking some minor damage on Sky Deck, the egg carrier hasn't really sustained any real damage. You might think one of the other characters might have done something to mess it up, but no, all 6 characters are on the egg carrier right now, and not one of them has done anything to sink that thing. I don't know if the dev just forgot something or hoped you wouldn't notice, but something is definitely missing here. The egg carrier is just falling out of the sky because the plot is done with it, which I think is fucking hilarious. From there, Sonic heads off to confront Eggman. Sonic finds him with Chaos, now containing 6 Chaos Emeralds and a frog. This is much to the dismay of Big the Cat, who is here for some reason. Chaos 6 was a fight that I thought was more of a waiting simulator, but I found out after I did this fight that it's apparently pretty pathetic. Eggman drops these ice bombs at you, and for decades now I've always thought the only way to beat the boss was to just attack one of these bombs and wait for Chaos to inhale it. Turns out you can just pick these up and throw them in Chaos's mouth whenever you want. This turns the fight into a huge joke, even more so with the Ancient Light. Oh yeah, remember when I said the Ancient Light was useless? Turns out, this is its exactly one other use. It does double damage in this fight. Not that you really need the help, Chaos 6 is quite paradoxically a really easy fight, but hey, I guess it saves you a minute of your limited time on this earth. On the subject of Chaos 6, I've never really understood what his whole deal is. Like, it seems like there should be a more gradual increase in his threat level as he absorbs the Chaos Emeralds, but Chaos 0 through 6 are all just different flavors of non-threatening. I get that there should be a bigger jump from 6 to 7 than there is between all of the other forms, but the first 6 Emeralds don't really seem to do much for Chaos, while the 7th one turns him into an unstoppable immortal water god serpent the size of a skyscraper. Like, I understand why Chaos 6 isn't quite that strong, but he should still feel like an extremely powerful opponent in single combat at least. If anything, Chaos 0 is the only one we ever see do anything. It knocks Knuckles the fuck out on 2 different occasions. I should know better than to expect any kind of lore consistency from Sonic Adventure, but still, it would be really nice to actually see some real progression from Chaos. With Chaos definitely permanently defeated and Eggman on the run, everyone makes their escape from the falling egg carrier. Tails flies off with Amy, and Sonic chases after Eggman by jumping off the side, dying instantly as contact with the ground shatters every bone in his body. Thankfully, Sonic once again survives dying and happens to see a giant temple in the middle of Mystic Ruins opening up. He follows this ball of light inside for the next action stage, Lost World. No, not that one. This one is better than that, at least, despite not being that great of a level. Lost World has a really cool aesthetic, being an ancient temple full to the brim with booby traps. The beginning is pretty good, with a high-speed run through some stone passageways, avoiding fiery pillars by running on the walls and the roof. Unfortunately, this level screeches to an absolute halt when you reach the center room with the big stone serpent. The idea here is that there are 3 colored switches in this room that you need to press in order to continue. This sounds like a puzzle, but it's really not. It's extremely linear. The problem is that despite not really being a puzzle, it still slows the game down and acts like it's giving you a puzzle, without actually having any of the intrigue a puzzle would provide to make up for the slowed pace. You spend so much time riding on the serpent in the water, fighting the camera in a weird collision to avoid accidentally careening into the water. Basically, you just jump off whenever you see a platform, and you'll find one of the colored switches and a button that will change the water level. This is a neat little concept, and I can see what the developer's vision was here, but oh my god, is the execution botched. You really have to wrestle with the game here to get everything working as intended. If you're busy fighting the camera and don't have time to react to a platform, you have to just wait for the serpent to go all the way back around. Repeated cycles can get really frustrating, but if you get too frustrated and overextend, you'll fall into the water and restart the whole section. It's kind of a mess. Thankfully, I had my age-old muscle memory to help me out on this playthrough, so it wasn't too bad. But when I first played this as a kid, this level caused me to give up for the longest time and not pick this game up until I was a little older and more capable. It's just another wonderful little Sonic adventurism where they were so close to having a good idea, then just fumbled it at the last possible moment. After leaving this room, you exit into the second half of the level that has this real spooky sounding music. I'm noticing a theme here where this game seems like it was specifically designed to scare 6-year-old me, because this part here at the beginning of this section used to freak me the fuck out as a kid. I see now that it's just a ridge high up in the jungle with the treetops below and a dusk sky in the background, but I used to think this was some kind of hellscape with green fire and a wave of darkness in the sky. I don't know, I was a stupid kid. Speaking of stupid, how about these mirror puzzles? This next room you walk into is totally dark, and in order to light it up, you have to shine one of these floodlights at the mirrors, which, for the record, look absolutely nothing like mirrors. I find this part really strange because there's never any kind of challenge or puzzle associated with it. There's no question as to where you have to shine any given light, it's just whichever mirror is closest. It leads to this mechanic feeling extremely pointless. All it does is slow down the level. It feels like nothing but a way to add a minute of padding to Lost World. I have always loved this next section though, where you have to dodge through some flaming arrows and then get thrown out into a water slide, which empties out into this pretty room with a pond and some greenery. This room always felt out of place here, but in a sort of comforting way. Something about its natural beauty in juxtaposition to the scary music and booby traps is very cozy. Once you're through this room though, you're thrown right back into the action with this flaming Indiana Jones boulder that pushes you into the final room. This room is really weird. It's full of these wall walking panels and buttons you have to press to activate them. It makes for some more interesting vertical platforming, but once again I question the implementation of the puzzle elements, because there's never any question as to what you do. You just press the buttons until the wall lights up and then you walk up. And it's not like I'm against puzzle elements or even easy puzzle elements, but if you're going to completely stop the game's momentum, please at least give me a little something to think about. Pressing the button until the wall lights up isn't a puzzle, it's just a roadblock. I would definitely rather have a puzzle meant for babies than something that frames itself as a puzzle but isn't a puzzle at all. But with that, the level ends as you enter a chamber with a huge mural on the wall, depicting chaos destroying the ancient civilization that the Mystic Ruins once was. Interestingly, this room actually has different music than the rest of the level so far. You only hear it for like half a second since the level ends when you enter, but I think it's the music that plays in Knuckles' version of Lost World. Weird. Sonic is shown a vision of the past by this ball of light. I'm assuming this is a vision of when Chaos was destroying the world in the past, given that his little shrine is on fire, but the game doesn't really do a good job of communicating that. We know that Chaos destroys the world with water, given what we see in the intro, so the fact that there's no flooding or any indication of Chaos actually doing anything is kind of weird. Sonic wakes up from this vision back outside in the Mystic Ruins and sees Eggman flying overhead towards his base. Sonic gives chase, and thus begins Sonic's final action stage, fittingly named Final Egg. Well, first you actually have to solve this little light puzzle in Eggman's base where you have to step on these buttons and turn them all yellow, but every button flips certain other buttons either on or off, so you have to figure out how to get it so your final button press makes everything yellow. I don't know. At least that's what I would do if you couldn't just solve this puzzle by mindlessly hopping around on the buttons for about 30 seconds until something works. 20 years and I still haven't learned how to actually do this, and I don't plan to. Final Egg is probably Sonic's hardest level unless you count difficulty through jank in Lost World. It's full of tricky platforming and encounters with some of the game's harder enemies. Final Egg is a pretty solid note to end the campaign on. It has a great sense of speed in some parts, and when it slows down, it's usually for an interesting platform challenge. There are also a couple of these rooms that get flooded with these pink robots. You can just run right past them, and you're kind of supposed to because they respawn infinitely, but if you run off to the side and charge up the ancient light, you can actually zip around the room and kill all of them. I mean, it doesn't really accomplish anything because they just keep respawning, but still, I love little details like this. Oh, and also this happened to me at one point too. Can't have a Sonic Adventure level without it breaking on you at least a little bit, but that's part of what I love about this game. Sonic's story finally ends with a climactic battle with Eggman's ultimate weapon, the Egg Viper. This fight is equal parts pretty good and fucking hilarious. It's one of those waiting simulator bosses. You're just biding your time for Eggman to do an attack that makes him vulnerable, but while you're waiting you have to constantly be on the move, which keeps you engaged a lot more than a fight like Chaos 4 does. The hilarious part of this fight is honestly just Eggman's voice lines. They're mostly just reused voice lines from cutscenes, some of which are reused multiple times in multiple cutscenes for some reason. He says them so many times in this fight that hearing them outside of it is always like a fucking jump scare.
Get a load of this! Get a load of this! Get a load of this!
Oh, and that "get a load of this" line, by the way, plays up to 4 times in a row every single cycle. Later in the fight, Eggman gets pissed off and starts destroying parts of the stage, suffocating you a little bit by taking away space you had to work with before. When you finally take out his health bar, in one last-ditch effort of desperation, he flings himself into the platform as he explodes. It's pretty easy to avoid, but it's really cool and cinematic, and a pretty solid way to end off the story. The Egg Viper is my favorite boss in Sonic's story and a strong contender for the best boss in the game. It's a high-pressure fight with awesome set pieces, tense action, and a great soundtrack. With Eggman defeated, Sonic and Tails reunite and run off into the sunset as the credits roll on Sonic's campaign. Sonic's campaign is far and away the best this game has to offer. It's the most full and fleshed out, offering the widest look at the story, the most levels, and the most content within said levels. On top of that, out of the playable characters, Sonic by far feels the best just to move around as. He's just so fast and intuitive, and for the most part, Sonic Adventure's levels were chiefly designed with him in mind. Occasional jank aside, Sonic feels incredible in this style of 3D platformer, just as good as he felt in his best 2D outings. Hell, sometimes the jank is a positive for the game. The spin dash jump alone opens the doors of speedrunning joy to the common man. Getting that burst of speed and launching yourself into the air feels incredibly intuitive, and breaking the level design in half with it is rewarding without feeling cheap. They really had something incredible here with this incarnation of Sonic. They set the bar so high on their first try, so it's a shame the adventure style of gameplay hasn't been seen in decades. If Sonic Adventure was Sonic's story, if this game was a short but focused romp as everyone's favorite blue hedgehog, I would have to say that Sonic Adventure is a pretty good game. A product of its time, for sure, full of programming imperfections and served with quirky presentation, but a solid game worth revisiting and appreciating, not just for what it was, but for what it still is. Unfortunately, this review is less than halfway over, and looking at my footage, my playthrough was only a third of the way through when the credits first rolled. Sonic Adventure is not just Sonic's campaign. While I would definitely be misrepresenting the game if I said everything after Sonic's campaign was bad, I'd also be lying if I said it wasn't downhill from here. And I mean that literally. Aside from the 6th character that we'll talk about towards the end of the video, the campaigns are laid out in such a way that it's almost an exact downward trend of quality after Sonic's campaign. Of course, you can play them in any order, so this isn't inherently true, but I'm more so referring to the natural order you would play them in based on unlock order and position on the main menu. Every step you take away from Sonic's story skews your enjoyment just a bit more from genuine to ironic. Granted, I still think that even at its lowest, Sonic Adventure isn't the worst thing I've ever played, but a big chunk of the latter half of the game is definitely more laughing at the game than laughing with it. Thankfully, we aren't quite there yet, because next up is Tails' campaign, which I think is still very solid. Tails' campaign more or less follows Sonic's campaign, so aside from the parts where the two are separated, the play-by-play of the story here is going to be a little bit more compressed. Now, there might be some people out there who would take issue with that, because while there are cutscenes that repeat in different stories, the devs decided it would be prudent to keep things fresh by rewriting the script slightly for each character's perspective of said cutscenes. The example people point to most often, conveniently for me, is Tails' story. Since Sonic and Tails spend so much time together, most of their cutscenes are the same, but the way they interpret the scenes is different. In Sonic's cutscenes, Eggman sounds like a bumbling oaf. He's a self-aggrandizing egomaniac that talks a big game but is ultimately incompetent, and that is reflected in his dialogue. In Tails' story, on the other hand, Eggman sounds a lot more intimidating, as a way of showing that Tails lacks Sonic's confidence, and that to him, Eggman is a true threat. At least, that's the consensus. I don't think this works as well as some people claim it does in practice. Saying that Eggman is more intimidating in Tails' story kind of involves some cherry-picking. In the cutscene before the Egg Hornet fight, which is often cited as an example of Eggman sounding more intimidating, Tails is still bantering right back at him. The first thing Tails does is diss him by calling him Eggman, to which Eggman gets all defensive and indignant like a whiny little baby. Then right before the fight, Tails hits him with this line.
Give me that Chaos Emerald, or else!
Or else what, huh?
Does this sound like someone who's at all intimidated? Tails is feeling confident. He's a fucking alpha male Giga Chad in this cutscene. With how bad the voice direction is in this game, I'm not even convinced that Eggman's more threatening voice in that first line is intentional. I think people might just be reading into something that isn't really there. Keep in mind, this is the same game where sentences in the same text box are said with completely different tones and entirely devoid of context because the voice actors weren't given proper direction.
That's Eggman! I wonder what happened to Sonic.
You could definitely make the argument that Tails relies on Sonic a lot, and that he might not be confident he could stop Eggman by himself. But that's a lot less about Eggman being an intimidating presence to Tails, and more about Tails leaning too much on Sonic for confidence. The Tails and Sonic comparison is really the only one where the changes are all that significant anyways. It's not usually an entirely different tone, it's almost always just a few rearranged words. You know, like in Sonic's story, Sonic says, "Whoa dude, I'm going to Whataburger, way past cool, you want anything?" But in the Amy cutscene he says, "Gotta go fast," or I guess I should say, "Gotta go to In-N-Out Burger. You want a double-double?" It doesn't really justify rewatching the cutscenes. Thankfully, one of the only universally agreed upon improvements in the DX version is that you can skip these cutscenes, so on repeat playthroughs you can just ignore them. But while you can ignore that recycled content, you definitely can't ignore the recycled levels, of which Tails has many. Tails has fewer levels than Sonic, and pretty much all of Tails' levels are just Sonic's levels with the fat trimmed off and some extra shortcuts added in. After defeating the Egg Hornet, which is slightly more time consuming here because you actually have to fight him for 3 cycles, you can jump into Tails' first action stage, Windy Valley. Aside from being shortened versions of Sonic's levels, Tails' levels differentiate themselves by being races against other characters, usually Sonic. In concept, this would make for tense gameplay, but in practice, this mechanic might as well not exist. It's comically easy to win. The thing that makes these stages fun to play, however, isn't the race gimmick, or even the stages themselves, really. It's the way Tails can move around them. Tails, unlike Sonic, has the ability to fly, and it's just as broken and fun to use as it sounds. In combination with the Jet Anklet, an upgrade you can grab in Station Square before doing any levels, you can get absolutely insane distance out of just one jump. Windy Valley is an especially great showcase of this, because Tails' version is only the second half of Sonic's version, the part where you're running down these floating pathways in the sky. Since you're constantly running downwards, there are no death planes, at least not any that you'll reasonably fly into, so you can basically finish this entire level without touching the ground. I don't know if going this far with it was the devs' intention, but it feels really good and it's fun to do. Yeah, you could call it cheesy and broken, but I've already played this level as Sonic. I think flying through it is a hell of a lot more fun than running through it again with a few lame shortcuts thrown in. From Windy Valley, you jump right into Casinopolis, where I finally got to play through the sewer section that's hard to get to as Sonic. This level really isn't much to write home about. It's also a cramped space that doesn't lend itself well to flying, which is the thing that makes Tails' gameplay fun and unique. Also, the progress meter at the bottom of the screen that you can use to gauge how well you're doing just doesn't function in this level. There are tons of branching paths out of the wind tunnels, and the game really doesn't know how to handle it when you and Sonic take different ones, so the progress meter will just flicker back and forth at random. You don't really need it though, because you're probably winning no matter what. Ice Cap is more of the same story. Tails' version is just the snowboarding section at the very end of the level. Unfortunately for Tails, he controls identically to Sonic on a snowboard, so aside from the racing gimmick that doesn't really add anything, you're essentially just replaying the second half of Ice Cap. Don't get me wrong, this is a great part of the level, but not so great that I would just want to replay it on the same playthrough for the hell of it. Still though, if I have to replay something one for one, a short and sweet section like this isn't so bad. But you know what is so bad? The Knuckles fight immediately followed by Chaos 4. At least it's slightly more fun to wait around as Tails because you can fly around in circles, I guess. But Chaos 4 is the same shitty fight it was before. Thankfully, your reward for beating Chaos is another 3-minute break with Sky Chase Act 1. Go outside, take a walk, feel the sunshine on your skin, get some vitamins, you've earned it. Once you're back though, you'll find that Tails and Sonic are separated after the Sky Chase crash. This means we finally get something unique by seeing what Tails was up to before Red Mountain. We see this really melodramatic scene that I think is Sonic and Tails meeting for the first time. You can tell it's a flashback because it's sepia tone. Tails sees Sonic for the first time, pogs, and decides to just wordlessly start following this stranger around, which thankfully Sonic takes no issue with. Upon waking up, Tails resolves to finish his prototype airplane to take on the egg carrier, but for that he's going to need a Chaos Emerald. Luckily, there just so happens to be one in Tails' one unique stage, Sand Hill. Well, kind of a stage. The game technically calls it a sub-game. It's another snowboarding level through this random desert. It's a fun romp with a great soundtrack, some awesome features like the collapsing ruins and this giant stone snake you see diving through the sand, and a cool side objective of trying to go through as many gates as possible. But it's really short-lived, only lasting about 45 seconds. At the bottom, Tails finds a frog and is immediately transported to the past for an exposition dump. He ends up in this really huge ancient city populated by Echidna people. I've always found it really strange that they bothered to make this place so huge, because really all it is a little hub for some exposition to occasionally be given and to hide a couple of power-ups. This game's development was obviously rushed, given all of the reused content, so it's weird they decided to spend time on this. All of the Echidnas even have their own dialogue. It's surprisingly detailed for a location that is only visited by a few characters for a few minutes each. Before you can receive your exposition though, you have to comb the area for an upgrade that allows Tails to spam his tail swipe attack. It's a bit odd that they require you to find this upgrade. It's required to get the upgrade, but the use of the upgrade itself isn't required or even particularly encouraged. I guess it's because they didn't want you to leave this area without it since you can't come back, but in that case, why not just hide it elsewhere? Maybe hide it somewhere on the egg carrier, or perhaps inside Tails' workshop or something. I mean, that's what I would have done. Too bad I was a literal fetus when they were developing this game, otherwise they could have hired me on. Tails finally gets his turn for an exposition dump from Tikal the Echidna girl, but the cutscene is bugged, or at least it was in my playthrough, because the background music for the area doesn't go away when Tikal's theme cuts in, so you just end up with this awful cacophony.
The servers are the 7 Chaos. Chaos is power, power enriched by the heart.
I mean, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I already think Tikal's theme is kind of loud and obnoxious, so throwing the drums in the middle is fucking terrible. Tikal says some cryptic shit about the Chaos Emeralds and the Master Emerald, and Tails gets thrown back into the real world, where he's immediately violently attacked by Big the Cat. Tails decides not to press charges and brings the Chaos Emerald back to his workshop, powering up the Tornado 2 and meeting with Sonic for Sky Chase Act 2.
Later.
Sonic and Tails crash land on the egg carrier once again. As it transforms, Eggman drops one of his trademark intimidating Tails story voice lines.
I guess you weren't expecting that, were you?
Eggman is also sure to let you know that the only way to reach him is through the Sky Deck. Now it's time to enter the Sky Deck. The entrance to the Sky Deck should be around here somewhere.
So, this must be the Sky Deck, huh?
Oh, it's gotta be. Sky Deck as Tails is the first half of Sonic's version, but I think it's actually dramatically improved here by virtue of being able to fly around all the slow parts. It's wide open, kind of like Windy Valley was, but there's a real risk of death here if you misjudge and fly too low, so it strikes a great balance of freedom and challenge. It's all over in about a minute and a half, but I'll tell ya, it's a real fun minute and a half. I should put that in my Tinder bio. So anyways, one quick fight with Gamma later, and Tails takes Amy off the egg carrier as Sonic goes to confront Eggman and Chaos. Upon landing, Tails watches as Eggman's model spins around down the street and then crashes with a cartoon pie-in-face sound effect.
That's Eggman! I wonder what happened to Sonic.
Eggman, with his plans foiled, resolves to fucking level Station Square and kill everyone in it with a ballistic missile. What does he even need Chaos for? This seems way more efficient, and while I'm no expert, I don't think Sonic is capable of stopping an ICBM, especially without the Chaos Emeralds. Seriously, I know it's a Sonic game and I don't want to overanalyze the plot here, but didn't Eggman specifically awaken Chaos to destroy Station Square and build Eggman Land on top of it? It just seemed so counterproductive. My favorite part of this scene though is watching Tails come to grips with his mortality in real time.
If that missile is launched...
Ready? Fire!
The missile ends up being a dud, so we don't have to watch everyone in Station Square die. They would never show a mass casualty event in the middle of a major population center in this goofy blue rat game for children after all. Tails then goes through his entire character arc in 3 sentences before racing Eggman to the crashed missile on Speed Highway.
I've changed a lot since I've started hanging with Sonic. But I can't depend on him forever. I know I can do this by myself. Okay, Eggman, bring it on!
Like Sonic's version, Tails' Speed Highway is also very, well, speed-focused, but rather than spending time dashing around roadways, platforming, and fighting enemies, the speed here manifests in zipping between rooftops and level segments with Tails' flight. I think this is the perfect Tails level. It's open air and encourages you to forge your own pathway by flying around, while also remaining challenging. You have to understand Tails' controls inside and out. This level really feels like a culmination of everything you've learned over the past hour. Oh yeah, the past hour. This story is really short. Aside from Sonic's, they're all pretty much this short. If you skip cutscenes and know where to go, you can finish Tails' story in about 30 minutes easily. The story isn't quite over yet though, as after Speed Highway there's one final confrontation with Eggman and his Egg Walker robot.
Oh no! It's Robotnik!
This might unironically be one of the best boss fights in the entire game. It's not a waiting game, you get to run up and fight him on your terms. He's vulnerable as soon as you get under him and he does his stomping attack. But it's not a complete joke either, because after each hit he jumps to the opposite end of the arena and fires projectiles at you to impede your approach. The shockwaves from the stomp itself can also be tricky to avoid. The music here is the same as Egg Viper. It's a bit less fitting here because this fight feels a lot less like a desperate, drawn-out struggle than the Egg Viper, but it's a good song either way. With Eggman finally defeated, everyone cheers for Tails because he did it all by himself. He then flies off into the sunset to reunite with Sonic. Whether this happens before or after Sonic's final encounter with Eggman is left a bit vague, because the next thing we see is Tails and Sonic meeting up and the credits rolling, just like Sonic's story. It kinda makes it seem like Eggman was in 2 places at once? Like, did he lose to Tails, then run off to his base and lose to Sonic? Or did he lose to Sonic and then decide to blow up Station Square out of anger? I don't know, man, I don't get paid enough for this shit. So in review, Tails' story is the most recycled out of all of the recycled content in this game, but it's done in a really clever way that for the most part makes the gameplay feel fresh. Playing as the other characters completely changes the context of most levels, whereas Tails is playing them in the exact same context as Sonic, just with vastly different movement. While Sonic's campaign is definitely more fleshed out and has higher highs, I would almost argue that Tails' campaign is more consistently good. The only level I don't really like here is Casinopolis, while all of the other levels feel great to fly through. Casinopolis isn't even bad, it's just not as good as some of the other levels. On the story end of things, I think the virtues of Tails' cutscenes are a little overblown by some people. I don't think his character arc is really anything to write home about. It kinda reminds me of people who call Pokemon Black and White peak fiction because they actually decided to add in a story for once, but it's the most bare-bones story of all time and people read way too much into it. Don't get me wrong, Tails' story isn't terrible aside from its janky Sonic Adventure execution that it shares with every other story, but it's not winning any awards. I remember when Sonic Forces came out, a lot of people were really mad that Tails quote-unquote lost all of his character development from Sonic Adventure in that game because he reverted to relying on Sonic, but he follows Sonic around like a lost puppy in every single Sonic game. He either has the same character arc or no character arc in every game he's in. I really don't think it's bad, I just really don't think it's all that good either. But do you know what is all that good? Knuckles' story. I mean, not really, I just needed a transition. Knuckles' campaign begins with a pre-rendered cutscene of the egg carrier flying towards Angel Island, a cutscene that I completely forgot existed. Knuckles monologues to himself for a little bit about the Master Emerald before he's rudely interrupted by Chaos standing before a now shattered emerald. Chaos hits Knuckles with that Super Mario before disappearing into his patented Big Drip form. This game's fantastic localization and voice direction are put on display in this cutscene, as Knuckles nonchalantly comments on how what he just witnessed was incredible, and sounds mildly inconvenienced by the fact that Angel Island is now going to fall from the sky.
Oh, that was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. Oh no, it's starting to happen. Without the Master Emerald's power, this whole island will fall into the ocean.
And fall from the sky it does, just like in the intro. It's now Knuckles' job to find all the missing pieces of the Master Emerald to restore his home. Knuckles begins his search by breaking and entering into the town hall, beginning his first stage, Speed Highway. Knuckles' version is unique in its total lack of both speed and highway. This level's great. You can get chased by the cops, get run over by cars, and commit several acts of vandalism. Aside from all that though, it's actually a lot of fun to explore. This part of Speed Highway really opens up and becomes a lot less linear when you're able to climb the rooftops like Knuckles can. This exploration is core to Knuckles' gameplay, as rather than reaching the end of the stage, Knuckles completes levels by finding 3 hidden pieces of the Master Emerald. These pieces spawn in 3 randomly chosen spots from a list of presets. At the bottom of your screen, you have a radar that can independently track all 3 pieces at the same time, changing from blue to green to yellow to red as you get closer to one. This really complements Knuckles' movement, as he has the ability to climb walls and glide. By climbing up high and gliding around, Knuckles can cover wide areas and scan for pieces, and once you pick up a signal, you can start zeroing in on it. If you get stumped, you can always ask one of the conveniently placed handy-dandy balls of light that will immediately fly directly towards an emerald piece, basically telling you exactly where it is. Sometimes, though, it'll fly just directly into the floor, giving you basically no information, except that the emerald is vaguely down. From Speed Highway, you can immediately head over to Casinopolis, which, like Speed Highway, is just the wide open section from Sonic's version. I actually really love this level as Knuckles. It's an absolute blast to play around in thanks to its great atmosphere and cool set pieces. Plus, there's no bullshit pinball. There's an entire second floor that Sonic can't access, or at least isn't supposed to access, full of awesome stuff to jump around on, like a pirate ship, a huge bronze lion statue, and this hidden chamber full of gears and machinery. Plus, you can watch Knuckles shower. There's even a giant golden Sonic statue in the middle of the level, with a weak point in its foot that shatters the whole thing if you punch it. It's also in Sonic's version of this level as an Easter egg. As you deposit rings, this statue will gradually be built from the bottom up. The first milestone is only 200 rings to get the feet built. To have it fully built, however, you'll need to deposit a whopping 5,000 rings, which would take for fucking ever. That's over 10 times what you need to beat the level, so most people will never see it, but it's still a really cool little oddity. This whole backstory makes it even funnier that Knuckles can just walk in here and destroy it. Exiting the casino, Knuckles gets his turn to go to the land of magical lore dumps. Knuckles watches an exchange between Tikal and her dad, where Tikal tries to convince the chief that war is bad, but unfortunately the chief thinks war is good. Knuckles and Tikal being the only echidnas here that got new models in the DX port is really obvious when juxtaposed with all of these echidna NPCs and the chief. It's not a huge deal, but it's really funny seeing them stand side by side. Knuckles has surprisingly little to say about this whole ordeal, despite the fact that if any character in this game should care, it should be him. He's seeing his extinct people, the great civilization of which he is the only surviving member, and he's just kinda like, damn, that's crazy. Knuckles catches Eggman awkwardly shuffling up to an elevator in the hotel while holding absolutely nothing. In all of his wisdom, Knuckles decides that Eggman must have a piece of the Master Emerald.
You take my emeralds? Yes.
Knuckles gives chase and finds Eggman in this unique little dining room area that isn't used in any other character's story. Not sure why Eggman was stashing chaos down here. I feel like if anything it would have been smarter to get a room than just doing all of this in the middle of the restaurant. But I mean, Eggman's the guy with 300 IQ, so what do I know? Eggman feeds Chaos the emerald he just stole from Sonic and Tails, creating Knuckles' first boss, Chaos 2. Chaos 2 is pretty simple. He's just a big brute guy that attacks by turning into a super bounce ball and chasing you around the arena. When he comes out of it, he can still block your attacks, but you can kinda just glide into him until he decides to take the hit. That's pretty much it, aside from an occasional stretchy punch. It's a pretty simple fight, but it's definitely not bad. Eggman tells Knuckles that Sonic is actually collecting Master Emerald shards. You would think that Knuckles wouldn't be very inclined to take Eggman at his word immediately after he maliciously had his goop monster attack him, but Knuckles is a little bit stupid, I suppose. Knuckles then proceeds to very, very, very slowly walk like 5 paces forward, and decides to find Sonic. But before Knuckles can find Sonic, first he has to go to Red Mountain. Since Knuckles is lacking the ancient light, he's going to need to find another way to open the gate, which he does with the Shovel Claw item found in the Mystic Ruins. You find it in this cave by Tails' workshop that you get locked into as you enter. You get out of this cave by digging up a convenient monkey self-destruct switch that blows up the sentry monkey blocking the exit, which you then need to carry all the way to the Red Mountain entrance to blow up the monkey there too. I'm not usually very averse to contrivance in a silly game like Sonic Adventure, but come on man, this has to be the most inelegant way I've ever seen a power-up be used as an arbitrary key for a level. And we're talking about Sonic Adventure here. Useless power-ups that do nothing but let you progress one time are this game's bread and butter. Anyways, Knuckles' version of Red Mountain is just the outdoor area from Sonic's version. Recontextualizing this level as a treasure hunt stage actually really works, because it lends itself well to being a wide open playground when you have mobility like Knuckles. And as you already know, I love the music here. Knuckles' Red Mountain kinda reminds me of Pumpkin Hill from the sequel, given that it takes place in a mountain range, but I think Red Mountain beats out that stage thanks to this game's better radar and Red Mountain's beautiful jazzy soundtrack. But as you know, all good things in life must come to an end, and sometimes they come to an end because of Chaos 4. Life is a cruel mistress. And you don't even get to take a break with Sky Chase right afterwards to process your trauma. Instead, you get to head into the Mystic Ruins jungle and carry 2 stone statues to unlock Lost World. Here in Knuckles' version of Lost World, we get to hear more of that song that played for like 2 seconds in Sonic's version. It's a really nice, chill, funky song. I like it a lot. It has a totally different vibe from the more dangerous tone of Sonic's music in this level. Knuckles' version takes place entirely in the part of a level with the wall panels. This makes sense to be the location in this level for a treasure hunt, since it's the most wide open and vertical. But the wall panels make even less sense here than they do in Sonic's version, because Knuckles can just climb the walls. Still though, while this level is pretty average, it gets a lot of extra points for the sick music. After collecting all 3 pieces in Lost World, Knuckles gets another trip to the World of Exposition, but doesn't put together that he's literally standing on Angel Island at the Master Emerald Shrine, where he spends all of his time. Knuckles then gets teleported back to reality, in front of the altar in the present, and still doesn't put together that he was at the Master Emerald Shrine.
This is beginning to blow my mind.
Knuckles puts all the pieces he's found so far back on the Emerald, and the Emerald shows him a vision of the egg carrier, where the last few pieces are located. It's the really low poly and barely textured model that appears after the Chaos 4 fight, and I've gotta say, that green filter makes it look even better. Sadly, Knuckles doesn't know where Eggman's ship is. But wait! Conveniently, Gamma literally drops from thin air directly in front of Knuckles, headed for the egg carrier. Problem solved.
I know. I'll follow it back to Eggman's base. Here I come, Eggman!
With Knuckles on board, the egg carrier pulls a Rise of Skywalker and lifts straight through the dirt in this pre-rendered cutscene. Knuckles takes a few steps on the egg carrier and the thing transforms as usual. This can only mean one thing. The Sky Deck.
I sense the Master Emerald. It can't be far from here.
I wonder if those Master Emerald pieces are in the Sky Deck.
That's I wonder what happened to the Sky Deck.
This is beginning to blow my
Sky Deck.
Whoa.
Knuckles' version of Sky Deck is kind of a wet fart to end his story on, but at least it's a short and relatively painless wet fart. It's just the last part of Sonic's version with the janky tilting mechanic, but here, Knuckles actually controls the tilt with a lever. This is required to get a few of the possible piece locations, but the level can mostly be completed without it. There's not really a whole lot to say about this level. It's wide open like the rest of Knuckles levels, but aside from the few piece locations that require tilting to open special doors, few of them are really hidden anywhere. You kinda just fly around until you've found all of them, which shouldn't take that long. Yeah, that's the case in most Knuckles levels, but the atmosphere and movement here don't really stand out compared to his other outings. In combination with the tilt jank, it's definitely the worst level in Knuckles' campaign. I wish I had more positive things to say about it. With Skydeck in the rearview mirror, Knuckles gets one last trip to the land of exposition. You'd think there would at least be some kind of significance to Knuckles having the most flashbacks so far, since he himself is the descendant of this dead civilization, but bro just cannot put it together. Tikal's dad and all of the ancient Knuckles guys fucking killed the Chao and have really pissed Chaos off. Things are looking pretty bad, which obviously has Knuckles concerned. Oh hey, the Master Emerald.
I still can't figure out that creepy monster. Huh? What's that?
What the fuck was that? I promise I didn't add this in. This is unedited gameplay footage. Like, that is straight up just... Like, that sounds like Knuckles is like... You know what, let's not dwell on that, I don't want to get demonetized. So Knuckles strolls up and watches Eggman flee from the egg carrier, Sonic in tow. That means that Knuckles' work here is done, and he can head back to Angel Island.
Now, I must return to Angel Island and the Master Emerald. No, it can't be!
Why is Chaos just standing there? Did no one notice? Was he just really awkwardly standing there waiting for Knuckles to glance in his direction? Like, did he just not want to speak up? Also, didn't Sonic just take out Chaos 6 before chasing Eggman off? Why is he still here? This game is fucking hilarious.
You can't stop me from restoring the Master Emerald.
Dude, no one's stopping you, just glide away. Anyways, Knuckles' final boss is Chaos 6, and it's identical to Sonic's Chaos 6, except for a couple of sections of floor that are blown out. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. You freeze him with the ice bombs, then damage him. Just like Sonic, you can even do double damage using your Maximum Heat Knuckles attack. Oh yeah, did I not mention the Maximum Heat Knuckles attack? The Maximum Heat Knuckles attack is kind of like Sonic's Ancient Light in that it's a charge attack on the B button. However, instead of being a key to a level like the Ancient Light, the Maximum Heat Knuckles attack is just a random upgrade hidden above the Mystic Ruins jungle that turns your gloves yellow. I love Sonic Adventure. This fight is inoffensive. Chaos 6 is just as fine, if not anticlimactic, as it is in Sonic's story, but it's really disappointing that this is Knuckles' final boss. With one other exception, every character gets a unique final boss except Knuckles. This is definitely the weakest end to any campaign in the game. Knuckles finishes off Chaos and actually ends up taking all 6 emeralds he had in him back to Angel Island. Why didn't anyone else do this for the entire game when they took out Chaos? Great question! Fuck you! Knuckles fixes up the Master Emerald, Angel Island gets lifted back into the sky, Knuckles monologues to himself a little bit more, and everyone lives happily ever after. Knuckles' campaign is kind of an interesting case study on the effect of all this reused content in Sonic Adventure. On one hand, the levels are quick and relatively painless, and some of them have great atmosphere like Speed Highway and Casinopolis. But on the other hand, all of Knuckles' levels being repurposed from Sonic's levels mean that aside from Casinopolis and Speed Highway, none of these areas really feel like they were designed to be explored like this. As much as the nerfed radar sucks in Sonic Adventure 2, I'd honestly have to give the nod to that game's treasure hunting levels over Sonic Adventure's. Spaces designed from the ground up for treasure hunting lead to much more engaging levels, and while some of them are definitely annoying, I'd rather play Meteor Herd or Aquatic Mine than Knuckles Skydeck any day. I really do love Knuckles cutscenes though. I don't know if it was intentional or just a result of the bad voice direction and localization, but Knuckles just comes off as totally socially inept and so autistically hyperfixated on the Master Emerald that it's ridiculous. And of course, the Sonic Adventure jank is omnipresent here as well. While this campaign's gameplay hovers around a 6 out of 10, Knuckles' cutscenes make for a fantastic ironic comedy. definitely a highlight. On the subject of Sonic Adventure's highlights, we're pretty much out of them for a while. Not that Knuckles' whole campaign was one, but I wouldn't call it actively annoying to play. Amy's campaign, on the other hand, is where the bag gets a little more mixed. Forget the M&Ms wrapped in cat hair analogy. Amy's story is a bag of trail mix with shit as an added ingredient. There's still M&Ms in there, maybe some cashews if you like those, but you're probably gonna get E. coli if you eat any of it. So I would love to just jump right into discussing Amy's story, but I'm still stuck on this after 20 years. What in the ever-loving fuck is going on with Amy's theme song? I haven't really commented much on anyone else's themes so far. They're mostly fine or whatever. Sonic's is about being free-spirited and fast. Tails is that song I mentioned before where the woman is like moaning in your ear about believing in yourself. And Knuckles, well, if you know, you know. But Amy's is just weird and kind of unhinged. There's some shit in there where the singer just whispers in your ear about shaving cats and how Sonic looks like parsley. I don't know. You never hear any of this in game since instrumentals of character themes play during cutscenes. You just get jump scared with the full version in the credits. You're just sitting there staring at your phone waiting for the credits to be done when suddenly you do a double take because you could have sworn you just heard this woman whisper in your ear about shaving a sphinx. But we're a long way from the credits right now, or at least our fourth viewing of them. Did I mention that you can't skip them after every single story? I'm so tired. Amy's campaign begins with Amy walking home from the grocery store, reminiscing about Sonic CD, the memories of which are animated with 3D models running around on these really grainy 2D images. This actually isn't Metal Sonic's only appearance in this game. He's a reward for collecting all of the emblems in DX. I don't have footage of this because there was absolutely no shot I was 100%ing this game for this video, so you'll just have to trust me. He's just a Sonic reskin though, you aren't really missing out on much. There's this really awesome part in this cutscene where Amy gets arbitrarily cut off mid-sentence and just pauses for 2 seconds while she does an about face to talk to the camera for some reason.
But now he's gone, and there's nothing left to do. But shop till I drop.
Amy then gets very shocked and drops her groceries when the egg carrier flies overhead. Fun fact, I noticed the grocery bag actually isn't present in the clip of the intro that depicts this scene. Literally unplayable. So anyways, a bird flies down from the egg carrier and hits Amy right in the face. I don't know why, but I have an irrational hatred of this fucking bird. Something about the way this bird looks activates something primal in me that makes me want to just punch it. It's kind of like the whole thing with the Ice Age baby a few years back. This bird is just incredibly fucking punchable. A giant green robot with grabby hands called Zero falls out of the sky shortly after and starts chasing Amy and the bird. Amy somehow shakes him off by ducking into this burger joint in full view of Zero. After successfully avoiding the robot, Amy resolves to protect the stupid punchable bird. From there, you're given control to start making your way towards the first level. You'll notice I haven't talked a whole lot about the trips through the adventure areas between levels so far. That's because for Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, I mostly covered it earlier with my broad statement that traversing the adventure areas is fun. It's never really anything to write home about, but these three characters are very fast and have their own unique movement options to turn your walk through the Mystic Ruins into a fun challenge of getting there as fast as possible. So why am I bringing this up now? Well, because getting around as Amy fucking sucks. Amy has a much lower top speed than our three previous heroes, and while that sucks, that's not the worst of it. The real problem is her painfully slow acceleration. It takes her what feels like ages to get up to her already low speed cap. Now, her slow movement is important for her level design, which we'll get into shortly, but it makes traversing the adventure fields extremely painful. You'll have to do a fairly long trek through all three areas too, because despite Amy only having 3 levels, they're all in different adventure areas. A significant portion of Amy's campaign is literally just trudging from point A to point B. Her trip through the Mystic Ruins unironically might as well be counted as its own level, but a really boring level. Her one saving grace is that when she's running at top speed, you can press the attack button to do this hammer flip. It does feel really good to use it first, but when all you can really do for entertainment is spam it for the hell of it, it kinda loses its luster. Anyways, Amy meets up with Sonic by Casinopolis. Amy chases him over to Twinkle Park, her first action stage. Amy's gameplay is simple. You just grab the balloon at the end of the stage to escape Zero, who is usually chasing you through the entire stage. This is why her slow acceleration is important. If she could just dash off like Sonic, there wouldn't really be any reason to fear Zero. It's actually kind of an interesting idea that adds some tension. This whole limiting of your abilities to make you vulnerable thing is something that's usually done in horror games. But while this may have been enough to scare the shit out of me as a kid, more discerning viewers may notice that this isn't a horror game. This is Sonic the Hedgehog, a platforming game about going fast. I'm sure you can see the issue. Even ignoring this weird genre mismatch, Amy's gameplay doesn't really work that well. In practice, Zero is pretty non-threatening because his attacks are so slow and telegraphed, and he can't catch you at top speed. Even if he does catch up to you, you can bash him with the hammer for a pretty generous stun. And even if he does hit you, his attacks are laggy and you have plenty of invincibility, so you can just pick your rings back up and go about your business. The devs try to remedy this problem by putting little puzzle-solving elements in Amy's levels to make you have to slow down, but you can just hit Zero to stun him and keep doing your puzzle. That's if he's even close enough behind you to be a threat anyways. You can usually leave him in the dust even despite your low speed. So now not only are you moving slow, but you're also just fast enough to trivialize the reason they designed Amy to be slow anyways. Genius game design. The only difficulty here is monotony. Amy's stages end up being incredibly easy, which I think is detrimental to her gameplay. Yes, Sonic Adventure is an easy game all around, but it ends up being fun because trying to complete levels as fast as possible is a blast. I always use the Pikmin 4 example here. Extremely easy game, almost embarrassingly so on repeat playthroughs, but it's a joy to play through because the difficulty evolves from trying to complete it on your first playthrough to trying to complete it efficiently on subsequent ones. That principle is a bit less fun when the game isn't designed with speed, efficiency, or skill expression in mind, hence why I think Amy's gameplay kinda falls apart. It's an interesting novelty, but I think it's good that she only has 3 levels. By her final level, it already starts to feel like Amy has well overstayed her welcome. As for Twinkle Park specifically, I think it's the best display of Amy's gameplay, mostly because it's short and features some unique content. Now my playthrough of this level was kind of fucked up. That awful sound effect that I mentioned in Sonic's version was present in the outside areas of this version of Twinkle Park as well. Thankfully, this is slightly mitigated by the fact that you don't spend a whole lot of time outside with Amy. After a brief beginning section by the pool where you have to press 3 switches to open a door, you enter the interior of the castle, which is a house of mirrors. This section is really interesting. It plays around with this mirror effect to disorient you. You have to look at the reflection to avoid collapsing tiles that lead to bottomless pits. Interestingly enough, this isn't a real reflection effect, at least as far as the level geometry is concerned. It's actually just a mirrored image of the room you're in. If you clip out of bounds, this mirror image even has collision, which I think is very neat. This part of the level also has this kind of pensive and creepy music. It fits the situation of being chased by an invincible robot through a house of mirrors. As much as I don't like Amy's levels in general, this one little section is really atmospheric, and I think it's the high point of her story. So, I guess that means it's all downhill from here, huh? Upon evading Zero in Twinkle Park, Amy is captured by Zero anyways and taken up to the egg carrier, rendering that entire sequence pointless. While sitting in jail aboard the egg carrier, Amy is visited by Gamma to collect the bird. I don't really get why this is a negotiation, or why she got to keep the bird in the cell with her in the first place. Gamma's pretty nice about it, considering that she's a prisoner and he has a fucking gun for an arm. Amy tries unsuccessfully to convince Gamma to let them go, but the punchable bird flies out and stares at him, making Gamma kinda just vibrate in place. This is something they do quite a bit with Gamma. They don't really have any other way of conveying emotion with his model, so they just speed up his idle animation and it looks ridiculous. I think it would be a lot more poignant if he just sat and stared the same way he always does. Sometimes less is more. Gamma lets the two out of their cell, and in order to escape the egg carrier, Amy has to play whack-a-mole. Eggman can be heard over the intercom taunting Amy, so he already knows she's out. Why doesn't he just lock the door and put her back in jail instead of letting her free if she beats his whack-a-mole high score? Well, so the game has an excuse to give you the warrior feather, of course. The most useless upgrade in the world. You know how Amy's gameplay is all about running away from a threat? Well, how about this upgrade that makes you stand in place and awkwardly spin your hammer around in a circle in such a way that is useful exactly 0 times? Side note, I love that Eggman is just sitting up on the bridge watching this happen. He has a little gamer freak out and mauls and seethes when you beat his high score.
What? I can't believe this is happening!
After Amy's whack-a-mole dominance, you can head into her next action stage, Hot Shelter. Aside from Tails' brief stop in Sand Hill, this is the only level in the game that isn't in Sonic's campaign. Gamma has a much better version of this level, so it's not totally hopeless for Hot Shelter, but man, this version sucks. Hot Shelter is full of little quote-unquote puzzles that mostly just involve turning a door handle or putting colored blocks into colored holes, like that puzzle for babies. This colored block puzzle is particularly annoying just because of how long it takes and the fact that it appears twice in the level. You have to do it with 4 blocks both times, and the controls are kind of finicky with picking them up and putting them down. I get the idea here is to add something that you have to do slowly while Zero is breathing down your neck. But the first time you do this block puzzle, Zero isn't even there. He breaks through a wall once you finish it. Yes, I get it. Game design principles. You introduce a mechanic in a safe and easy place before ramping up the difficulty, yada yada. You've all seen a video essay about a game before. But if they wanted to introduce this puzzle, couldn't they just do it with 2 blocks or something on the first one? Or fuck, how about you don't even bother introducing it, because obviously you're supposed to put the colored blocks into the colored holes. You could even stick a tutorial orb there for anyone who just can't seem to figure it out. I don't know, this part of the level just really bugs me. Then there's this door. This stupid door. You open this door by spinning the handle to the left once and to the right 3 times. How do you get this information? You ask the tutorial orb right next to it. Zero isn't in this room, so there's no time pressure being added by this or anything. And this isn't even an introduction like that first block puzzle. This is the only door that's like this in the level. What does this have to do with anything? Why is this here? It serves absolutely 0 purpose. Just to add insult to injury, this massive section in the middle of the level makes this awful machinery noise, kind of like Twinkle Park's outdoor sections. It's so loud it almost drowns out the music. It's incredibly obnoxious and once again, physically painful. In conclusion, Hot Shelter is really bad. At least the Amy version of it. I don't like this level one bit. After Hot Shelter, Amy finally gets her turn in Magic Echidna Exposition Land. As if Amy's story couldn't get more obnoxious, for some reason it spawns you in the Echidna City proper, even though the cutscene you need to view is in the Master Emerald Shrine. Up to this point, you've never needed to actually go there from the city. You've just spawned there every time there's been a cutscene there. So unless you've played this game before, you'd never even know to check there. And it's even through a loading zone that doesn't particularly look like it leads anywhere. I guess the devs just wanted to make you run around as Amy just a bit more as a big fuck you. The cutscene depicts Tikal meeting the Chao for the first time, meaning this is apparently Tikal's first time at the Master Emerald Shrine, which is weird, because it's literally within walking distance of the Echidna's capital city. Why they waited this long to go try to take the Chaos Emeralds is beyond me. Amy ends up back on the top deck of the egg carrier and gets intercepted by Eggman. Sonic shows up just in the nick of time, but Eggman once again employs his slow mechanical claw from his hovercraft to grab the bird. Just like last time, Sonic, the fastest thing alive, stands there and watches this happen. Well, to be fair to Sonic, Eggman did tell him he was too late.
Too late, buddy!
Turns out, the bird was keeping a Chaos Emerald on him. In him? I don't know, man. Amy stops Sonic from finishing Gamma off, just like in Sonic and Tails' story.
That's one of Eggman's clunkers.
Whoa, Sonic, I don't think you can say that.
I'll nail that Eggman.
Gamma does some more vibrating and then leaves. As Tails and Amy land, Tails runs off to do his version of Speed Highway. In an interesting cinematic parallel, Amy also goes through her entire character arc in 3 sentences here.
I wonder what Sonic is doing. He's always rescuing me, it seems. I should be more independent.
This cutscene is great because the Punchable Bird's comically large pendant opens to reveal an extremely low-res picture inside of him with his Punchable Bird family. I don't know what the familial relationship is here. Are they friends? Are they his parents? Are they perhaps triplets?
Triplets born!
Amy decides to help the bird find his family, and to that end, it's time to begin the long trek to Final Egg. Alright, let me just stop in the Chao Garden real quick, then we'll hop on the train and... Oh. Anyways, it actually only took me about a minute and a half to get all the way from the beginning of Mystic Ruins to Eggman's base, but if you fall and have to go through the jungle proper, this will take you forever. Final Egg is a really weird stage for Amy. It's shorter than Twinkle Park, but I'd hesitate to call it short and sweet. I'd say it's more short and bland, like a Wendy's single burger with no cheese and only mayonnaise. The beginning of the level is very similar to Sonic's version, just a run through a hallway with tons of spike balls and some enemies. About a minute into the level, you have to press a button and wait over 10 seconds for an elevator to come down. You'd think this would be here as some kind of time pressure, but no, Zero isn't even in this room. Maybe I just outran him in the hallway where he previously appeared, but you'd think he would have caught up in the almost 15 seconds I spent standing in this room if he could get in here. You then have to wait 10 more seconds for the elevator to go all the way back up, meaning that roughly 1/6 of this level's sub 3-minute runtime is spent just on waiting on an elevator. Incredible game design. The only other unique feature Amy's version of this level has is this room with 5 colored doors inside. One of these doors is selected at random to be the correct one in every playthrough, while the other 4 lead to a dead end. At least Zero is here to actually exert some kind of pressure on you to make a decision, but in practice, this is just another boring waste of time. And the level is pretty much over at that point. My playthrough took me 2.5 minutes, and that was with me picking 2 incorrect doors in the door room and then flubbing around in this final room here for about 15 seconds. That means assuming you have a good run, let's say you get the real door on your first try and you get through this last room without significant time loss like I had, you're looking at a sub 2-minute level, about 30 seconds of which is wasted on an elevator. I'm not mad or anything, this is fucking hilarious. I just think it's important to mention that this is one of Amy's 3 levels. If I finished this level faster, and went through the jungle on the way here instead of over it, the transit here would have been longer than the level itself. Final Egg is a short level, but I must reiterate, not a sweet one. A real McChicken of a stage. It really might as well not exist. And that is made doubly true by the fact that this level is narratively irrelevant too. The only thing that comes from this level is finding out the bird's family isn't there. In fact, Amy realizes the bird's family is probably on the egg carrier, which is where you just were before this whole exercise with the final egg. Now you get to walk your happy ass back through the jungle and find your way onto the egg carrier, just to fight the final boss. And this time, there's no option to jump over the jungle. You're stuck trekking through on foot. If you get stuck on an incline or accidentally step in water, Amy slows to an absolute crawl, so you can't even hammer flip around. And as the cherry on top, you have to climb this ladder at the end that takes 20 seconds because Amy's ladder climbing speed is arbitrarily slower than the rest of the cast too. Just as one final middle finger from the game, this is also the first time you actually have to transit to the egg carrier as an adventure area, rather than just being brought there by the plot. You get there by going through this little archway with a boat icon under the Mystic Ruins train station and jumping on the raft at the bottom. There's a boat in Station Square that takes you there too, but that's even less telegraphed. This really stumped me as a kid. And it's especially confusing because the disembodied intercom voice tells you that the train for Station Square is leaving. I always thought this voice clip was the game's way of telling you to go to Station Square, which is doubly confusing. You don't even need to go anywhere once you reach the egg carrier. The cutscene before the boss fight just starts playing as soon as you get there. They could have just teleported you here and nothing would have been lost whatsoever. The bird flies off, immediately comes back with his family, and everyone lives happily ever after. Hey editor, can we replay that a couple times? Who am I kidding? I am the editor! This moment is very cathartic for me. Anyways, Amy finally bosses up and decides she's going to fight Zero. Zero's fight is basically the ruined construct fight from Tears of the Kingdom. You knock him into the electric wires, then bash him when he's stunned to deal actual damage. It's all over in a matter of 30 seconds or so, which isn't a bad thing I guess, but it kinda makes you wonder why she didn't just do this earlier. The punchable bird wakes up and flies away with his punchable family, after this really bizarre fake out. The bird then flies back to Amy for some reason, so I guess he really just flew away to pretend to die and get my hopes up. Amy decides that from here on out, she's going to vaguely do her best and make Sonic respect her, beginning her girl boss era and ending her campaign. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, Amy's campaign is the first one that I can honestly call bad. Sonic's was a lot of fun. Full of jank because of its breadth and depth, but its low points definitely take a backseat to the high points. Tails' story was short yet satisfying, lacking Sonic's super high highs, but also pretty much devoid of significant lows. Knuckles' campaign was inoffensive with a couple of really enjoyable moments. Unfortunately, Amy doesn't really have any peaks to speak of, and the valleys are pretty bad and numerous. It's just a lot of wasting your time and slowly crawling through boring levels. Despite being really short, about 45 minutes including cutscenes, it feels like an absolute slog. Tails' story took me about 15 minutes longer, but felt shorter to me because it left me wanting more. Amy's story falls right into that sweet spot of being bad enough to be bad in an unironic sense, but not being bad enough to be a funny mess. I'm struggling to find anything positive to say about it, and the negative stuff is all just mildly annoying. It's the dreaded 5 out of 10, a fate worse than death. On the subject of fates worse than death, Big the Cat. Big's story is so inconceivably stupid that it loops back around to being still stupid, then does one more loop to actually, you know what, still really stupid, but after around 5 laps and some Olympic level mental gymnastics, it finally reveals itself to be an ironic comedy masterpiece. Everything from Big himself, to the cutscenes, to the levels, to the very fact that this all made it into the game is just this perfect storm clusterfuck of bullshittery, and I love it. If this was bad on purpose, if the devs were in on it, this would be the funniest prank of all time. I would expect Big in a bad game, but I would never expect Big in an otherwise pretty good game. I'll say it right up front, Big's campaign is a 2 out of 10. This game mode sucks ass and the game would be better without it. But I'm not here to make games better, I'm here to tell you what we got, and what we got is Big the Cat. Our story begins with this fat bastard asleep in the forest, on top of his bed with a power-up glowing below, just to make the cutscene look more janky and out of place. His pet frog, aptly named Froggy, of course, hears a crash and jumps out to investigate. He gets attacked by chaos, and the worst transition I've ever seen in any piece of media ensues, as the screen cuts to brown, and then zooms out to reveal the bottom of Big's shoe. Big wakes up and watches as Froggy, now sporting a tail, makes off with his lucky Chaos Emerald. Big gives chase, and the campaign officially begins. So for starters, Big is slow. obnoxiously slow. Unlike Amy, there's no real gameplay reason for it. He just has low acceleration and top speed, all without at least having a fun movement option like hammer flip. With all of that said though, traversing the adventure fields as Big is slightly less painful than as Amy for a couple of reasons. For one, he has power-ups littered around the hub world. They aren't super great, but at least it's something to find that rewards exploration. Secondly, he's actually given a couple of neat things to do between levels. For example, upon entering the interior section of Station Square and seeing Froggy go into the sewer under this car,
What you doing under that car? What's wrong?
Big uses his totally normal strength to lift the car and give chase. Rather than jumping up to this ledge like Sonic, Big goes the opposite direction through the sewer and finds an elevator that takes him up to Twinkle Park. One little detail I love here is that the devs accounted for Big's model being, well, big, and if his tail gets caught in the elevator door, you can hear him say, As you've probably guessed, Big's first action stage is Twinkle Park, so I guess it's time to talk about Big's gameplay. Okay, I know realistically that a lot of you watching have already played or at least know enough about this game to know what Big's whole deal is. I get that. But we have to remember, as this game gets older and older, we're getting to the point where less young people have played it or watched some kind of analysis of it. So I'd bet money that there is a chunk of people watching that have no idea what Big's gameplay looks like. If you're one of these people, I want you to take your most educated guess. Consider Sonic Adventure's identity, what this game's gameplay has looked like so far, and using that, give us your hypothesis. If you feel like it, pause the video and comment what you think. I genuinely want to see if you get it. Alright, are you ready? Let's take a look. It's fucking fishing. Big's gameplay is a fishing simulator, and it's a really bad one. The main objective of every Big stage is to find whatever body of water Froggy is swimming around in, cast your lure, and hope you can catch him. I wish I was kidding, but also I don't, because I couldn't have thought of anything funnier. The long and short of it is that Big the Cat is an advertisement. Sega wanted you to buy this fishing Dreamcast controller designed specifically for a series of fishing games on the system, and I guess they wanted to use Sonic Adventure as a kind of gateway to hopefully get kids into fishing. Video game fishing, at least. This is absolutely hilarious to me, because it's obvious that Sonic Adventure, ambitious as it was, had an extremely rushed development, hence why they had to reuse so much content to pad out the length. I don't know how much time it took to develop the fishing mechanic, maybe I'm wrong here and it was a really quick add-in, but I strongly suspect we missed out on at least some kind of actual substantive content, so this could be here. Maybe we could have had an entirely new level if they didn't add Big. If that's too much to ask, maybe they could have at least done a Sonic version of Hot Shelter. But no, Big. So let's take a look at Big's fishing gameplay, starting with Twinkle Park. Big's version of Twinkle Park takes place exclusively in this small area by the pool. You simply look into the pool, figure out where Froggy is, and cast the fishing rod with B. From there, you just wait. You can kind of jerk your line around one specific direction or reel it in a little bit if you want, but that's it. It's random whether or not Froggy will decide to bite, and somewhat annoyingly, there are tons of other fish that might just decide to bite instead. The camera angle the game gives you to look at your lure is abysmal. You can't see anything. You usually have no idea if Froggy is coming towards you or not. He usually just jump scares you out of the bottom right corner. Because of this, you kinda end up just sitting there with a really bad cast sometimes. You might feel apprehensive to reel your line back in, because you never know. Froggy could be right there heading for your hook and you could be ruining your chance. It's kinda like gambling, except no one could ever possibly be addicted to this. Also, let me share some sage wisdom that I wish I had known decades ago. You can press both camera buttons at the same time to reel your hook in instantly if you want to cast your line again. I didn't know this until halfway through this playthrough, so I painstakingly reeled it back in manually every time, which is awful on this stage in particular because your hook will just get stuck on this little lip in the pool, and you just have to hope that Sonic Adventure's gods take mercy on your soul and eventually dislodge it from the collision. When you finally do get Froggy on the line, or another fish I guess if you're into that, you have to immediately press down on your control stick to get into like fish combat mode. From there you have to start reeling that sucker in with the A and B button. A button reels fast, B button reels slow. But you have to be careful not to reel too fast, since if this tension meter on the right fills up, your line will snap and you'll lose a life. I don't know if there's some technique to it. If there is, I've never figured it out. I just learned that you can slowly and steadily reel in Froggy by alternating A and B at age 6, and I've been doing that ever since. Whatever works, I guess. I'd love to tell you more about what makes Big's version of Twinkle Park unique, but there's really nothing to say. It's an extremely small area with a single body of water to fish in. Describing Big's fishing mechanics is describing Big Twinkle Park. Oh, except for the fact that it takes place outdoors in Twinkle Park. Which means that awful sound I've referenced on Sonic and Amy's version is playing the entire time. So not only was I wrestling with this game's fishing mechanics, I was wrestling with this game's fishing mechanics with this as the background noise. I literally couldn't have come up with something more disastrous if I tried. This took me 15 minutes, by the way. That's longer than every Amy level combined. That's the beauty of Big's story. Upon exiting Twinkle Park, you get to do it all over again in Ice Cap. The Ice Stone spawns directly behind the Twinkle Park elevator. Like with Sonic and Tails, the cave you need to go through blows out as soon as you get to the Mystic Ruins, but this time the camera doesn't show it happening. Wow, puzzle solving. Big's movement is so bad he actually kind of struggles to jump into the cave. Fantastic. Before heading into the level proper, you can pick up this upgrade called the Life Belt that lets Big float on top of the water. You can still descend by holding the jump button down, which is intuitive enough I suppose, but it makes getting out of water really awkward, as you now need to submerge yourself and pop back up like a beach ball to get enough height to reach land. It's incredibly janky and leads to situations where you're fighting the game for like 30 seconds at a time just to get up on the shore. Ice Cap is actually pretty interesting as far as Big levels go. The gameplay still sucks because the fishing is terrible, but if you're a completionist, there's actually a little bit more to do here than just fish. The level takes place in the interior portion of Sonic's Ice Cap, but there's a surprising amount of big exclusive areas to explore here. In order to access these areas, you have to break the ice and swim in the water below. I think you're supposed to use these boulders that you can pick up to break the ice, at least that's what the hint orb says, but Big's fat ass can break through just by standing on the cracked part. There's some really cool stuff down here, like this neat little stone archway you can walk through, revealing a substantial back area of the level with this awesome giant skeleton set piece. You can see an upgrade locked behind some rocks that you can't get through, so it gives you an incentive to explore further and try to find a path. It ends up being a lure upgrade, of which there are 4 in Big Story. All of the other ones are hidden in the adventure fields. In fact, this is the only upgrade in the game hidden in an action stage. I'm not 100% sure, but I think you need at least 1 lure upgrade to catch Froggy in this level, meaning that if you didn't grab one in the adventure field, you need to grab the one in this stage. That's probably why it's here, so you don't get stuck in an uncompletable level and have to quit out. So yeah, Big's Ice Cap is surprisingly interesting insofar as that there's a little bit of real game design going on here. Granted, this level still ends up sucking ass because you still need to deal with the horrible fishing mechanics, and this level took me over 15 minutes again, but I think it's interesting seeing how just a little bit of effort can take a 1 out of 10 concept like Big's fishing and elevate it to a 3 out of 10. Hey, you can't win them all. After Ice Cap, we once again see Big the Cat jump scare Tails. Froggy gets away once again though, so now you get to do more fishing! This next level is pretty unique too though, surprisingly enough. Good? No. But another 3 out of 10? Also no, but a really solid 2 out of 10. Big's version of Emerald Coast is fairly distinct from Sonic's. It's a wide open area full of water, meaning you'll have to look around to find Froggy. There's not as much to do in this level as there is in Ice Cap, but there's one part that tickles my brain in just the right way. If you dive underwater in front of this rock here, you'll find an underwater cave that leads into an alcove inside, full of fish and complete with a palm tree growing out of a tiny island in the middle. I love little passageways and hidden things like this. It's so pretty and relaxing here, and it's satisfying to find. If the fishing wasn't complete and total garbage, this is the kind of place I'd love to spend some time just reeling in some fish. Especially since Big's version of Emerald Coast has a completely different soundtrack than Sonic's that just screams summer relaxation vibes. If Froggy was in here, or if anything was for that matter except for more fish you aren't going to bother catching, I might have bumped this level up to a 3 just for the fun of it. Thankfully, between looking for the cave, searching for Froggy, and catching the little bastard, Emerald Coast only took me about 8 minutes to finish. I think that would still make it the longest level in the game so far outside of the other big levels, but hey, progress is progress. With Froggy finally in hand, Big's story comes to a close. Okay, Gamma steals Froggy from Big's hands, and Big chases him onto the egg carrier for one final level. Big's last level is Hot Shelter, and it's about as fully featured as Twinkle Park. Aside from a brief walk through a hallway to get to the body of water, this is once again just a tiny area with one place to fish. Or at least that's what I thought. I only just noticed on this playthrough there's an expansive second half of the level exclusive to Big. There's even a checkpoint. There's a tiny passage that opens up when you flood the central room, giving you access to this room with a plug at the bottom. You have to use Big's fishing rod for something unique here. By casting your line and maneuvering the hook just right, you can grab onto the plug and pull it, increasing the water level in the central room and giving you access to an entirely separate area above the front aquariums. There's nothing to do up here but catch more fish, of course, but it's a really neat little area that was fun to discover. I really like this spot where you have to break the glass to access the water underneath, so you use this monkey and the bombs he throws. It's a really clever use of this monkey enemy, and it's the only example I can think of in this game where you have to manipulate an enemy to your advantage like this. This is all made really strange by the fact that Froggy is just in that central room. Assuming Froggy cooperates, you can end this level in just a few minutes. This entire back area, while interesting on the surface, ends up being entirely superfluous. I think this would have been a great place to hide another lure upgrade. Even if that wouldn't actually accomplish anything, at least it would be something to reward your curiosity beyond more awful fishing. Hot Shelter is another weird level. There's a little more going on here than Emerald Coast and Twinkle Park, but what it has going on doesn't have any real reason to exist, so I think I'll have to give it a final rating of 2.5 out of 10. That's still like a 9 on the big scale though, so good for you, Hot Shelter. For some inconceivable reason, the Exposition Orb deems Big as important enough to receive a lore dump. So just to pad out Big's story a little bit further, we get to see a cutscene. Tikal goes to the Emerald Altar for the first time and sees the Master Emerald and is like, "Oh my god, the Master Emerald controls the Chaos Emeralds? What?" Big absorbs absolutely none of this information because he is brain dead. Big comes back to the present just as the ship transforms back to normal, which means the other characters must have just made their way through the sky deck. What, were you expecting something? Big emerges up into what should be a familiar area at this point. Chaos makes Froggy cough up the Chaos Emerald. Turns out Chaos doesn't just need the Emerald though, he needs Froggy himself, because apparently the reason Froggy has been acting weird is because he's been possessed by Chaos's tail? I think possession is a little out of left field for Chaos's power set. And just from his tail, like how does that work? Is Chaos controlling Froggy or does the tail have its own agenda? So many questions. Sonic shows up to fight Chaos 6, but Big has to get his frog back, meaning that, yes, you get to fight a boss as Big. So how does he even fight? You can smack enemies with the fishing rod as Big, so just freeze him and hit him, like with Sonic and Knuckles, maybe? I mean, what else could it be? It's a fishing boss. Now, it's exactly as stupid as it sounds, but thankfully it's not as awful as it sounds. You don't have to play the fishing minigame. All you have to do is cast your rod in such a way that you hit Froggy, and you win. It's not that hard, it can be over in a matter of seconds. This is 6/7 of the monster that destroyed the entire Echidna civilization, by the way. What a beautiful capstone to a beautiful story. Big leaves Sonic to do the rest, escaping the egg carrier by fucking stealing Tails' plane. Okay, I guess he can pilot a plane, sure. Big story ends as he and Froggy return home. The pair runs through the forest, they fish together, desecrate an ancient and sacred temple. It's a heartwarming conclusion to the worst fucking thing I've ever played. So I guess this is where I sum up my review of Big Story like I did the rest of them, right? Well, it was something. Okay, Big Story may be bad. I don't know what you're waiting for, there's no but. Aside from that though, I can at least say it's funny bad, but maybe not necessarily while you're playing it. Big is funny to observe. It's funny that Big exists. It's funny that I'm sitting here talking about Big right now. But holy fuck does it suck to play. I know I called Amy's 5 out of 10 a fate worse than death, but actually sitting through Big Story is an exercise in patience. I feel like a saint after this. One playthrough of Big Twinkle Park with that awful sound in the background and not knowing you can instantly reel in your line is roughly equivalent to a decade of training to be a monk up in the mountains. I've noticed a concerning and growing trend of Big apologetics on the internet in recent years. A lot of stuff along the lines of, Big Story isn't that bad, and it's extremely easy to finish quickly if you know what you're doing. I think this is an overcorrection on the part of Sonic fans trying to combat the Sonic was never good narrative that was popular online a while back. You can feel however you want about Sonic Adventure as a package, but Big's campaign is insanely bad and it's not up for debate. There's no excuse for Big Story. This isn't a mixed bag, it's not quote-unquote not that bad. No, this shit is terrible, and it has no place in this game. It's creatively bankrupt, ineptly designed, tedious as hell, and extremely frustrating, all wrapped up in absolutely zero tutorials to teach you how the mechanics actually work. Yes, in a hypothetical world where you know exactly what to do, you know the controls, you know where Froggy is, and Froggy decides to cooperate, you can finish Big Story quickly and move on to greener pastures. But does that really make it not that bad? Sure, it might not be that bad for you, Super Sonic Fan 12, on your 27th playthrough of Sonic Adventure, but for literally anyone doing it for the first time, it's going to take them hours, and that's only if they choose to stay the course, rather than playing literally anything else with their limited time on this earth. Big is absolutely agonizing to play before you figure it all out. Hell, this isn't my first rodeo with Sonic Adventure. I knew what I was doing, it had just been a while, and it still took me forever. Call it a skill issue if you want, but this is not a good game mode. It's not even an okay game mode. I think Big Story is a great lesson. So bad it's good isn't a concept that works very well when it comes to gameplay. If it's something you can watch or observe, like a movie or just the story of a game, then so bad it's good can be really, really fun. Hell, I'd probably have a blast watching someone play Big Story, but god, I don't think I ever want to touch this story again. Holy shit. We're getting pretty close to the end of Sonic Adventure at this point. I've been accepting this game for what it is and getting a mixture of ironic and unironic enjoyment out of it so far. With the first few stories, I was having a great time. The unironically good parts were really fun, and I could roll with the punches when it came to the messy parts because the game around it was quality. I could find enjoyment within the jank. But the past two stories have been nothing but jank. I haven't had unironic fun in a while, and I'm out of gas as far as irony goes. I need to play something good to refuel a bit. Thank God something good is on the menu then. Our final campaign, E102 Gamma, is the light at the end of the tunnel. We've seen this enigmatic robot pop up in almost every story so far. It's about time we finally get to figure out what his deal is. Gamma's story begins as he awakens to the world for the first time, with a face full of Eggman.
All systems, full power!
Yeah, I don't think this model was meant to be looked at this closely. Eggman explains that Gamma is the second in his line of E100 robots. Despite this, he's somehow less advanced than his older brother, Beta, which is kind of counterintuitive since you'd think the newer model would be improved, but I guess Eggman works off of Pokemon Company logic where everything he makes just gets progressively worse over time. Gamma immediately gets to play his first level, a shooting range, which ironically is technically Final Egg. This stage is 30 seconds long. I think it's meant to be a tutorial though, which I find pretty interesting because true tutorials are pretty sparse in early 3D Sonic. The first one I can even think of is before Team Rose's story in Sonic Heroes. Sure, you have the hint orbs and Omochao in the adventure games, but those are totally optional and pretty soft tutorials. This one is an even softer tutorial than those examples though, because Eggman just drops you into the level, says a line about destroying targets, and lets you go. So about those targets. Gamma's gameplay is extremely unique and is pretty fun too. We're back to linear levels like Sonic, Tails, and Amy, except the end of Gamma's levels usually involve fighting a boss at the end. Bosses aside, the main twist is that as you're going through the level, the timer is counting down rather than up, and if your timer reaches 0, you die. This mechanic lends itself to going fast, which thankfully Gamma is actually capable of, finally having satisfying movement for the first time in 2 campaigns. You don't have to speedrun your way through these levels though, you get more time just by killing enemies. Holding down the B button sends out a targeting laser for a few seconds, and releasing the button shoots all targeted enemies. The more enemies you can target with one B press, the more time you get from killing them. You're incentivized to build large combos since you get more time per enemy that way, and you're also incentivized to keep moving so you can actually make it to the end in time. This combination makes for some really awesome run and gun gameplay. It's fast, it's fun, it feels great. It's really a breath of fresh air after the past couple of hours. Gamma's newly acquired skills are immediately tested as Eggman pits him against his older brother Beta to determine who will be serving on the egg carrier. Most of the other stories kind of paint Eggman as a joke, which makes sense. Yeah, he's the main villain, but he's a cartoonishly evil man shaped like an egg. He's an incompetent villain, and the lack of threat he poses to the other characters is evident in his portrayal. But here in Gamma's story, we see that he's actually a massive asshole. He's a manipulator and he treats his subordinates like garbage. He pits Gamma against his brother just for the fun of it, and just proves himself time and time again to be awful throughout the rest of Gamma's story. It's interesting seeing Eggman through the lens of someone that actually has to answer to him, someone that's truly threatened by him. The fight with Beta is pretty simple. It's not all that different from a character fight. You just target him, then shoot once his invincibility is gone. Rinse and repeat. It took me 8 seconds. The intro and results screen were longer than the fight itself. Thankfully, what some of Gamma's bosses lack in difficulty, they make up for in emotional impact. Yeah, you heard me right. Emotional impact. In this game.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
I love how these robot models convey emotion. Something about their unchanging expressions makes for far better body language than the characters with fully animated faces somehow. I think it has something to do with leaving something for the imagination. Like, look at this scene right after the fight where Beta wordlessly begs to join Eggman and Gamma on the egg carrier. You can just see the desperation, even though he doesn't say a word and just stares blankly at Eggman. Aboard the egg carrier, we see what, in my opinion, is one of the weirdest scenes in the game. The camera pans down as this triumphant intro track plays and spotlights shine down on Eggman, about to give a speech to 4 of his E-Series robots. It seems like they were going for humor with this scene, making Eggman seem like a self-aggrandizing fool. At least that's the vibe I get from how it's written, but the voice directing is, well, Sonic Adventure, so it kinda gets lost in translation and comes off as awkward.
Aha! Testing 1, 2, 3.
Eggman orders the robots to find Froggy, since, as we saw in Big Story, Eggman needs him to get Chaos's tail back. Like we also saw in Big Story, Gamma finds Froggy in Emerald Coast, meaning that's where we have to head. Emerald Coast is another extremely short stage. It's only about a minute long, it only goes right up past the boardwalk at the beginning. It's so short that you can actually see where you started from the end of the stage, and not in an, oh look how far I've come kind of way, but in an, oh, this level barely exists kind of way. I have very little to say about it, unfortunately. It's fun, just extremely short. Gamma, an actual fucking robot might I mention, gets his own turn to be exposited to by everyone's second favorite echidna after Emerald Coast. Upon arrival to the past, he analyzes his surroundings and determines that he doesn't know where he is.
Must determine location. Accessing data. No data found. Location unknown. This presents a problem.
I'd like to take a moment here to just appreciate how good Gamma's voice is. As a general rule, the voice acting in this game sucks. No offense to the cast, they're great fits for these characters and do a great job in later games in the series, but it's clear that they're pretty inexperienced as voice actors and they weren't given great direction. And that's totally fair. Video game voice acting was pretty new back then, and if anything, I think the bad voice acting is charming and funny. Gamma's voice, on the other hand, is fantastic. Gamma gets around the issue of this game's disjointed and awkward line delivery by, well, being a robot. What sounds disjointed and awkward coming from Sonic sounds totally natural from Gamma. Couple that with the actor, the late Steve Brody, having the perfect voice for the role, and Gamma is just a joy to listen to. But you know what isn't a joy to listen to? This absolute cacophony of Chao voices in this cutscene. God, this sounds awful. Tikal just tells Gamma that Chaos protects the Chao and that her dad wants to take over. Same thing we've been seeing for the past 5 characters. Thank you, Tikal. Very cool. We cut back to reality as Gamma and his brothers compare frogs in front of Eggman.
This frog's the one we want. No, here's the real one. My frog is the right one.
Unfortunately, Eggman has some harsh words for the robots that found the wrong frog.
Ah, dummies, 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 dummies!
Eggman beams all of the other robots away, but E-103 has just enough time to turn and give Gamma the 1,000-yard stare. It's kind of creepy and visceral seeing them twitch in the light as one of them turns and looks at his brother. It's yet another example of these emotionless faces conveying so much. It's fantastic. Speaking of creepy and visceral but fantastic, Gamma's next task is to go through the door to the prison and retrieve the punchable bird from Amy. He gets confused and ends up going in the wrong door, and what he finds on the other side is pretty haunting for a kid's game. Inside the room, parts of Beta's mangled body are scattered on the floor. On top of a mechanical operating table, what's left of him is being poked and prodded by surgical instruments, turning into some kind of mechanical monster. The way Gamma says his brother's name here is actually kinda sad.
Beta.
I love how when Gamma exits the room after what he's just seen, all he has to say is,
This is the wrong room.
you can tell he's trying to be a good servant to Eggman. After all, he seemed happy when Eggman praised him before. He wants to remain impartial and stick to his programming, but what he's seen has definitely shaken him. This is some crazy shit for Sonic Adventure. 30 minutes ago, I was playing a fishing minigame as an obese purple cat with a lower IQ than my actual cats combined. In the correct room this time, Gamma grills Amy for the bird, and like I mentioned in her story, for some reason it's a negotiation. The bird once again causes Gamma to vibrate in place, which I already mentioned not really liking before in Amy's story. The bird wordlessly convinces Gamma to let Amy escape, but he's not completely off of Eggman's hook yet. Eggman orders Gamma to the deck, and he complies, grabbing an upgrade along the way in one of the egg carrier's previously locked rooms. The jet booster allows Gamma to slow his descent and hover in the air after a jump, sort of like a slightly worse version of Knuckles' glide. It's a great addition to Gamma's moveset that makes him even more fun to play as. Gamma makes it up to the top deck and fights Sonic, which goes as well as you would expect. Actually, I was checking my phone during the cutscene and didn't pick my controller back up in time. I think I may be the first person in recorded history to ever actually lose a Sonic Adventure character fight. Interestingly, in the Gamma version of this cutscene, instead of stopping Sonic from finishing off Gamma, Amy talks Gamma down from shooting at Sonic. Sonic isn't shown to be losing the fight necessarily, Gamma just hasn't had his ass handed to him already in this version. Gamma stands down, and for the final time, the egg carrier spontaneously explodes. Amy teaches Gamma the meaning of friendship here, which sounds cheesy, and it kinda is, but it makes sense in the context that Gamma is, once again, literally a robot. I guess it follows that he wouldn't know what friendship is. That patented Sonic Adventure awkwardness doesn't really help it feel any less cheesy though.
Even Birdie wants the best for you. You must ditch that awful Eggman.
Amy, come on!
The characters all go their separate ways as usual, and we see where Gamma flew off to. He's pensively hovering through the mystic ruins, reminiscing on everything he's experienced so far. Memories of things that have slowly awakened his humanity flash on screen, from Beta's ruined limbs, to E103 looking him in the eyes, to Amy pleading up at him, and at the end, the first thing he ever saw, Dr. Eggman. The images flash by over and over again, increasing in speed, until the image of Eggman remains and grows staticky. Gamma finally realizes that his creator is his true enemy, deleting his own master registration and naming the E-Series robots to his friend registration, I guess. With that, Gamma's path is set for the rest of the campaign, saving the animals trapped inside of his E-Series brothers. It's a pretty awesome and slightly tragic premise, and it's also entirely separate from the other stories from here on, making it really unique amongst the cast. Gamma's first stop is Windy Valley, another fairly short stage, but unlike Emerald Coast, there's a boss fight at the end of it. The road to the boss is pretty straightforward. It's just the first half of Sonic's Windy Valley with the boss waiting where the tornado was. Along the way, you can build up really satisfying and huge combos on these long badniks that have 10 targetable sections, and the TNT on these walls you have to detonate to continue. The fight against E103 Delta at the end is identical to the Beta fight in Eggman's base, but he takes one more hit to kill. Delta is as trivial to defeat as Beta was, but the fight is improved a little bit by the emotional significance. Watching Delta explode and release the animal inside is a little bittersweet. Yeah, the animal is free, but the entity that was E103 Delta, that was Gamma's brother, is dead. Gamma's next stop on his solemn quest is Red Mountain, in this case just the interior section. This level is Gamma's most fleshed out so far. It consists of a lot of running and gunning through tight hallways packed with enemies, with some precarious platforming sprinkled throughout. Like the rest of Gamma's levels so far, I'd struggle to call it difficult, but it's a great time. The fight against E104 Epsilon is identical to the fight against Delta, with slightly less emotional significance thanks to Epsilon not having that moment that Delta had on the egg carrier. Speaking of the egg carrier, that's Gamma's last stop for his final action stage, Hot Shelter. When Gamma arrives on the egg carrier, we get this cutscene that plays this super triumphant music that only plays once in the entire game as Gamma overrides the egg carrier's controls and opens the Hot Shelter. Gamma's version of Hot Shelter is that fleshed out and fully realized version of Hot Shelter we've been waiting for since it first appeared in Amy's story. I absolutely adore this level. I honestly think it's one of the best this game has to offer. I'd say it even beats out some of Sonic's levels. This stage is Gamma's longest, taking about 5 minutes to complete, which is a problem when you realize you start with 3 minutes. You're going to need to move fast and actually take care to build up your combos. You really need to have mastered Gamma's gameplay to make it to the end. It didn't give me much trouble on this playthrough, but I remember this level being really difficult when I was younger. It's definitely no joke. Hot Shelter starts with a run through the section with the giant gears that Amy also went through. It's loud in here, like in Amy's version, but it's a short part of the level, and Gamma moves through it much more quickly than Amy did. Gamma ends up taking a different path than Amy after that, heading towards a station for a high-speed cargo train. Here there's this weird claw mechanic. You need to stand in a certain spot and shoot a switch to be moved onto the cargo train. Usually I would complain about the level's momentum being halted like this, but since you can still aim and shoot while while you're in this state, you can use the time to build up a combo on the nearby enemies. Once loaded into the train, you end up in this really cool section where you're jumping between two high-speed trains, with your progress being gated behind taking out groups of enemies. It's almost like an on-rails shooting gallery. It's a really neat idea. You need to balance taking out the enemies quickly to save time, with building up large combos to gain extra time. Now, there's definitely a little bit of jank in this section. It's not perfect, but it's a great concept, and it's executed well enough that the novelty leaves a great impression. Getting off the train puts you in the final stretch, and after taking out a few more groups of enemies and building up some more time for the boss, you drop into the arena to fight E105 Zeta. Not that you're going to need the extra time at this point. This fight is even easier than the other robots. All you have to do is walk around and shoot all of his cannons. There's no invincibility or anything, it just takes about 10 seconds. While this boss is extremely easy, it's neat that it's a unique boss, and I think it's made even better by its thematic significance. Zeta is beyond recognition. He's been turned into this hulking, immobile mechanical monster covered in weaponry. It almost feels like some light body horror in a way, seeing how far gone Zeta is, which makes it all the more satisfying to put him out of his misery and rescue the animal inside. A fantastic conclusion to an outstanding level. With E103 through 105 saved from Eggman's influence, only 2 E-Series robots remain, Gamma's older brother, and of course, Gamma himself. As if on cue, Beta's remade form flies overhead, leading Gamma to his final confrontation. As the fight begins, the boss's name flashes on screen, just like with every other boss in the game so far. You'll notice that this boss's name is simply E101 Mark II. Whatever this new thing is, it's not Beta. Beta is gone. Now it's up to Gamma to save what's left of him. This fight is fucking awesome. Beta's theme goes insanely hard, and the fight itself goes even harder. Beta looks incredibly intimidating, from both his monstrous design and the way he moves, blitzing around so fast that he leaves after images. Unlike all of the other E-Series robots, you can't just shoot at him, he's too advanced for that shit. He bats away your shots like nothing. The only way to damage him is to wait until he makes himself vulnerable by charging at you. Now, of course, waiting for a boss to open itself up by attacking is very video gamey. Hell, it's how you damage half the bosses in this game. But something about it feels so much cooler in this fight. The only way you can hope to beat Beta is by exploiting his new savage nature. If he simply fought you in a measured way, Gamma would surely lose a fair fight, but Beta is too monstrous for that now, throwing caution to the wind just to attack his brother. Beta has this one really cool attack where he flies up and the camera pans behind him, so you need to dodge his shots and the resulting explosions from this weird camera angle. It gives this attack a huge sense of power and scale. It really sells the feeling that Gamma should be outmatched here. He looks small and insignificant in the shadow of his older brother. Even though the fight isn't all that difficult from a gameplay perspective, the thematic gap between these two characters and their capabilities is communicated very well. With one final shot, Gamma defeats Beta once again, but this time for his brother's own sake. In its last moments, E101 Mark II takes Gamma by surprise and lands 2 shots point blank before succumbing to its own damage. From the wreckage, the animal powering Beta is revealed to have been one of the Punchable Bird's family members all along. Gamma hobbles away, now fatally damaged. The bird, like the one back at the jail cell, stares Gamma in the eyes. Gamma walks onward, pushing past as the image from the bird's pendant flashes in his fading vision. The image flashes on screen one final time. Gamma's robotic and melancholy theme music cuts abruptly, and Gamma dies. The bird that was Beta flies away as Gamma disappears in a fiery explosion, accompanied by a bittersweet and more natural-sounding piano version of his theme. In the last moment before the camera fades and the curtains close on Gamma's story, the bird's other family member flies into frame and looks into his brother's eyes, revealing Gamma's true identity and the source of his inner conflict. Roll credits. Damn! This is Sonic Adventure. This game's plot is for the most part pretty goofy and inconsequential. I must reiterate, less than an hour ago, I was playing as Big the Cat. But wow. Gamma's story is unique, poignant, and in spite of all of Sonic Adventure's silliness and flaws, extremely emotionally effective. In just under an hour, Sonic Adventure has elicited more emotion from me than plenty of games with older target audiences in mind have been able to do in decades. And on top of all of that, the gameplay was great too. Sonic Adventure is a game that trends downward in quality the moment you leave Sonic's story. It's a slow decline at first, before Big takes it to rock bottom. But somehow, out of nowhere, Gamma's story not only picks the game back up, but ends it on the highest note it has narratively. Is Gamma's campaign perfect? No. The stages, fun as they are all far too short outside of Hot Shelter. Hot Shelter is the only stage in which you'll ever have to worry about time. You could just run straight to the boss with minutes to spare in the other stages. Gamma's movement feels great in every level he's in, but it's obvious that Hot Shelter was the only one designed with him in mind. The story here is great, and it's by far the best presented thing in the game, but even Gamma's campaign suffers when the other characters start talking. Those are all mostly nitpicks though. At the end of the day, even if it's only 1 hour of this game's total runtime, I think Gamma's campaign is Sonic Adventure at its best, and it's a perfect note to end the game on. At least it would be, if it was what the game actually ended on. Unsurprisingly, they aren't just going to end the game without wrapping up the whole Chaos plotline. Upon finishing all 6 campaigns, another option will show up on the character select screen: Super Sonic. It's represented with a question mark for some reason, and the voice clip is just Sonic going, which is really weird because it just says Super Sonic right there. This isn't a surprise, you're going to be playing as Super Sonic. Now, if you remember all the way back at the end of Knuckles' story, he took the 6 Chaos Emeralds that Chaos had gathered back to Angel Island, leaving one loose end, the emerald used in Tails' plane. This means that most of the emeralds are located in one central location. That central location is once again falling down into the ocean, much to Knuckles' dismay. Knuckles spots Eggman passed out on Angel Island, and as Knuckles tries to ask Eggman what's going on, it's revealed that Chaos has gone rogue, attacking Knuckles and taking his emeralds. Sonic arrives on Angel Island to investigate its fall, only to find Knuckles and Eggman knocked out, with Chaos nowhere to be seen. Eggman gets up and yells one of his iconic boss fight lines before running off somewhere.
Ah! He's not gonna get away with this!
Tails and Sonic finally decide to search for the Tornado 2, which you'd think they would have done way earlier instead of laying around the Mystic Ruins. Even if they didn't know that Chaos was still around, just leaving a Chaos Emerald laying around in the open for anyone to find like that is really irresponsible. Anyways, Sonic gets one final trip to Exposition Land, and watches as Tikal's father sends his men to seize the emeralds. Chaos shows up and kills the king and his men with the power of the Chaos Emeralds, I would assume turning into perfect chaos in the process. Not right here on the spot though, because the giant water monster is nowhere to be seen. Tikal uses her incantation she's been saying in all of these flashbacks, and sacrifices herself to seal chaos inside of the Master Emerald before he can destroy the entire world, thus explaining why he was in there in the first place at the beginning of the story. Sonic then wakes up and just... the most Sonic Adventure cutscene ever.
Sonic, wake up!
I was on a snooze cruise, I guess.
Good thing you're okay. You just sort of conked out there. Knuckles left already. Come! We gotta go after the last emerald.
Lead the way.
It should still be on board the Tornado too.
Can't have a finale without some of that good old-fashioned jank. After the end of Gamma's story, I had almost forgotten what it felt like. Turns out our heroes got there just in time to not get the emerald, meaning that Tikal directly caused this mess by delaying Sonic for the sole purpose of showing him a flashback. That or Chaos has a flair for the theatrics and thought it would be really funny to take it right in front of Sonic and Tails. Actually, let's go with that, that's much funnier. Tails has a very believable reaction to witnessing an event that may very well have world-ending consequences and will get thousands of people killed.
Now what do we do?
And finally, it happens. The scene we saw from the intro, the destruction of Station Square, and the emergence of chaos, this time without music. In the intro, it feels more exciting than scary or tragic, but here, the lack of music kind of makes it haunting. You hear people going about their day, the typical sounds of life in the city, and then this visceral, awful sound of water destroying everything in its path as all of these people fucking die. It's weird how dark this is for a game with Sonic Adventure's tone, because most games marketed at kids typically stop the world-ending event before thousands of people die. Just look at the sequel. The Bio-Lizard doesn't nuke New York City. This shift in tone makes Chaos's emergence from the side of the skyscraper a bit unnerving. To this day, I still sometimes have weird dreams about flooded cityscapes, and I think seeing this as a kid is part of why. Of course, the pre-rendered cutscene fades out and reveals the significantly less unnerving figure that is Chaos's in-engine model. I know it looks worse in DX, but even on the Dreamcast, this big guy looks a little goofy. I mean, just look at the way his jaw moves. He looks all floppy and flaccid, not ethereal and draconic like in the pre-rendered cutscene. I get it. It's an old game and they were limited by the hardware, so such a large monster even existing is pretty impressive. But I can't not comment on it when you get such immediate juxtaposition. Like, come on. Eggman flies in to save the day and get his revenge on his backup egg carrier that he apparently just had, and is immediately shot down in a fiery explosion, with a really out-of-place moment of slapstick as he shoots off into the air like Team Rocket. The orb of convenient exposition in tutorials flies in, this time not to give a flashback, but to reveal itself to have been Tikal all along. I know, right? Who could have seen this coming? They only had the same voice and appeared at the exact same time in every story with the same theme music. It was a real mystery. Anyways, Tikal takes on a physical form and tells Sonic that Chaos has to be sealed away, as he absorbs all of the Emerald's power, leaving them as mere gray husks. But Sonic's not cool with sealing Chaos away. Despite the fact that Chaos just brought ruin to an entire city, Sonic feels bad that sealing Chaos won't change the way he feels inside. I mean, that's very nice of you, Sonic, but I don't think now is the time. People are dying. And we get jumpscared by Big the Cat. In fact, all of the characters show up, even Gamma's bird. They give Sonic the husks of the emeralds, and Tails reveals through some stupid ass pull that Chaos can only use the negative power of the emeralds, but Sonic can use the positive energy within them to take on Chaos. A bunch of random human characters then yell out their support for Sonic, presumably from the buildings, my favorite line in the game being among them.
Go, Sonic! Yeah, Sonic!
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 I have no idea why, but the way she says Sonic here just absolutely kills me.
Sonic!
The guy afterward is great too. It sounds kind of like he's moaning Sonic's name.
Sonic!
With the cheers of the people and the power of good vibes, Sonic transforms into Super Sonic, otherwise known as The final confrontation and the end of Sonic Adventure swings into action as the game's main theme, Open Your Heart, plays in the background. I am a sucker for some good old Crush 40 Sonic music, and this song is an absolute classic. It's hard not to get hyped with it playing in the background. The fight itself is pretty awesome. It's standard Supersonic final boss battle fare, but who doesn't love a good Supersonic fight? The basic goal is to build up enough speed while running at Chaos to be able to fly through his body. If you reach Chaos without enough speed, you'll fly out without damaging him and be sent back to the beginning. So basically your goal is just to hold forward, dodging debris and Chaos's attacks while collecting rings to sustain your super form. It can be a little finicky since you're going so fast, and the speed requirements are actually fairly stringent, so the fight does a good job of keeping you on your toes. It's not incredibly difficult, but it's not a pushover. You have to try your best, or it's definitely in the realm of possibility to run out of rings and die. After 3 hits, a second phase begins that is functionally identical to the first phase, just with more difficult attack patterns from Chaos and more debris to dodge in the water. The only other difference is that for some reason, Open Your Heart is replaced with this tense orchestral theme, which, don't get me wrong, is definitely fitting for a fight with a giant water monster in a ruined city, but feels kind of weird after Phase 1 had that triumphant tone with the main theme. If they had to have both of these songs, you'd think they'd have the tense theme play during the first phase, with Open Your Heart cutting in for the second phase once you're like, oh yeah, I've got this. I know Sonic Unleashed, for example, does this with the 2 distinct phases of its final boss. It would probably be best if the Phase 2 song just didn't play anywhere in this fight, because honestly, the tone of the fight starts off positive and hopeful coming out of the cutscene, and nothing happens in the fight to swing it one way or the other. I know this is a pretty common complaint, but it's just a really baffling decision. It took more effort to make a whole separate song than it would have to just use Open Your Heart. Regardless, this is a pretty awesome final boss, and the scale of it is impressive given the limitations of the console. The fight is fun, and the concept and setting are incredibly solid. When this fight was remade for generations over a decade later, it held up beautifully. With Chaos finally defeated, Tikal is able to calm his weakened form with the knowledge that the Chao he was protecting now live in harmony with humans. Tikal and Chaos ascend to what I assume is the afterlife. Tails says something really tone-deaf considering how many people are dead.
All's well that ends well, right?
And Sonic runs off into the sunset, bringing Sonic Adventure's story to a close. But wait, there's more! The story may be over, but we have just a little bit more to talk about. As I just mentioned, the Chao live in harmony with humans, and from the very beginning of the game, you're able to interact with them by entering any of the game's 3 Chao Gardens. There's one of these in each area, and I have to say, they have some great theming. The Station Square Garden is on the top floor of the hotel, complete with a skylight. The Mystic Ruins Garden is a massive, lush area full of greenery and water features, and the Egg Carrier Garden has a great tropical vibe, with a neat little lore implication that this is Eggman's vacation home. Of course, central to the Chao Gardens are the cute little bastards themselves. In the Dreamcast original, the Chao system was pretty bare bones. They more or less existed to send to the little screen thing on the Dreamcast controller. I don't know, I didn't have a Dreamcast. Here in DX though, they implemented the Chao system from Adventure 2, which is extremely robust and a lot of fun to play with. Seriously, I put an embarrassing amount of time into Adventure 2's Chao Garden growing up, and when I make the inevitable Sonic Adventure 2 video, you can bet your ass I'll have a lot to say about it. Unfortunately, here in DX, it's an extremely neutered version of Adventure 2's garden. As far as I'm aware, all of the bells and whistles are here. Chao alignments, different Chao types based on stats, breeding for colors and traits, you can do it all. The problem is, it's extremely clunky and tedious. First of all, you have to manually make your way to the Chao Garden every time you want to visit. If you want to maximize your Chao stat gains, that'll be after almost every level, since you increase their stats by giving them these animals dropped by defeated enemies. You can only hold 10 animals at once, so you're wasting animals if you don't stop to empty your inventory. But that's a lot of time and effort spent running between levels and the physical locations of the gardens themselves in the adventure areas. I'd love to say more about the Chao Garden, but really, there's no point. Why? Well, because your Chao stats increase so slowly that over the course of an entire playthrough, they won't see any significant growth. I don't know if you've noticed, but in my footage, you see me going out of my way to collect animals in every level. That's because throughout my entire playthrough, I was making a concerted effort to stop here at the Chao Garden as often as possible and pump my Chao full of stat points. After almost every level, I dutifully went out of my way to run to the Station Square Garden, then spent upwards of 10 minutes scrambling to give the Chao animals and food. It was a tedious process. And what did I have to show for it? This guy. I didn't even bother naming him. This guy wasn't capable of winning a single race. His stats were that low, it wasn't even close. For the uninitiated, the end goal of raising Chao is to enter them into races. All of their stats influence how well they do on different parts of the track. Run increases their speed, swim increases their swim speed, etc., etc. This guy was not competitive in any of those stats. In order to make a competent Chao in DX, you would have to sink dozens of hours running through stages, picking up animals and throwing them at your Chao, over and over again, rinse and re-fucking-peat. A better YouTuber might have put themselves through that for the sake of a better video. A better YouTuber also might then go on to talk about Mission Mode, the other side content that Sonic Adventure DX has on offer. I don't know, this shit's already gonna take me like forever to edit, so let's just move on to the conclusion. Sonic Adventure is a really special game. At least, it was. It's definitely a product of its time, but at its time, it was an experience like no other as far as 3D platformers were concerned. You weren't getting sprawling hub worlds, fast-paced levels, and a massive overarching story with 6 playable characters anywhere else. Not in Mario's transition to 3D, that's for sure. Oh, you fool. You thought I was going to finish talking about this game without comparing it to Mario? It's like a rite of passage, I kinda have to. If anything, in the context of their release window, I'd argue that Sonic Adventure is a far more ambitious and impressive game than Mario 64, and if you put me in a game store back in the day and had me choose between the two, I think I would have taken Sonic Adventure any day. Yeah, Mario 64 is like 4 years older than Adventure, but that's counterproductive to my point, therefore I'm not going to mention it. So why then does Sonic Adventure seem to fall out of public favor with every day it ages, while Mario 64 seems to be in a never-ending renaissance? I think the key difference here is in the developers' priorities, where they invested their limited assets and time. Mario 64 invested heavily in its gameplay. It barely has a story to speak of, the worlds are mostly disconnected and very video gamey, and the characters never get much deeper than Toad. Sonic Adventure, on the other hand, spreads itself a lot thinner. Its gameplay is great with most of the cast, but even at its best, the gameplay is nowhere near refined. However, what it lacks there, it makes up for in its cohesive and interesting world, its fleshed out characters, and its high-stakes narrative. Mario 64 is designed to be the best platformer it could be, while Sonic Adventure was designed to be, well, an adventure. Now, hot take, I don't think Mario 64 has aged as well as everyone says it has. I think it's hard carried by nostalgia and the fact that it's a good speed game. As a casual 3D platformer, I can think of dozens of games I'd rather play before it today, including every subsequent 3D Mario. But while I don't see it as a flawless masterpiece, it's easy to see why people still like it. Everything else be damned, that tight gameplay still feels just as good almost 30 years later. As games have gotten more refined on average, even as Mario 64 gets older, as every other aspect of it gets more and more outdated, its gameplay is just as tight as most modern titles. Unfortunately for Sonic Adventure, it just tried to do too much and couldn't fine-tune any aspect of itself. At a time when games weren't as refined, when every aspect of Sonic Adventure was impressive just for existing, it stood out from the crowd with its breadth. But as games evolved over the following decades, its breadth became less and less impressive, and its lack of depth grew more and more glaring. Big adventure games that try to do a little bit of everything like Sonic Adventure did have risen in average quality significantly since those days, mostly thanks to technological improvements and modern sensibilities. With the benefit of modern tech and hindsight, it's easier to cover your bases and have fewer blind spots. As a result, these days, rather than standing out for anything particularly impressive, Sonic Adventure stands out for its awkwardness. In a modern context, Sonic Adventure is still a game worth playing, but half of the reason now is to laugh at it. Its janky presentation, meme-worthy content, and silly story are just as important to enjoying the experience as its great movement or level design. That all being said though, there are still plenty of things to appreciate. There are some great levels here, some of the characters have great mechanics, and for a world that is relatively small by today's standards, it feels expansive and lived in. So, was this fabled rough transition to 3D truly all that rough? Looking back at Sonic Adventure, I'd honestly have to say no. Not comparatively, at least. For a first real attempt, it's a fantastic skeleton of a game that tripped over itself in its ambition. There are nuggets of brilliance here, buried as they are in mounds of monotonous padding. But the thing is, it didn't really take Sonic long to find his stride in 3D. Here in Sonic Adventure, he was already walking, and they really hit the ground running with the sequel, Sonic Adventure 2. Now, what happened afterward for the following 2 decades is up for debate, but I think as far as the transition goes, the dead horse that's been beaten so thoroughly that it's defied the law of conservation of matter and been entirely eliminated from physical space, I think I can conclusively say that it wasn't all that rough. Our perception of Sonic Adventure has shifted over the years, and justifiably so, but that doesn't mean that back in the day, back in the transitionary period itself, this game was anything but magical. While we laugh at it now, it's important to acknowledge the happiness that it brought a whole generation, and recognize that said happiness isn't all the result of blind nostalgia. Trying to defend this game as a masterpiece that holds up flawlessly is a losing battle, but I will always appreciate Sonic Adventure for what it was in its time, and even for what it was a little bit after its time, as part of my childhood. For my part, I had an absolute blast replaying the game, from enjoying the parts that hold up to laughing at the parts that don't, and even indulging in a little bit of shameless nostalgia. If you played this game growing up like I did and haven't revisited it in a while, I think it's worth another shot. You'll be surprised, both pleasantly and unpleasantly, but while I think you'll find it's not the same game you thought it was growing up, you'll see that it's a really interesting product of its time, a real museum piece of the early 3D era. If you haven't ever played this game, whether it was before your time or you just happened to miss it, I'd recommend giving it a try. It's only $8 on Steam, and you can easily beat it in a weekend. While yes, I did just spend the last 3 hours spoiling it for you, it's still worth a play just to see for yourself how ambitious it was for its time, and that there really is still a lot of fun to be had here. Well, I suppose that about covers it. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you've stuck around this long. I had a fantastic time making this video. I hope you all enjoyed it a fraction as much as I enjoyed making it. I know it sounds cheesy, but making this video was an adventure in and of itself. Last year, I never would have believed you if you told me I would be making a feature-length video in 2024. If you enjoyed it that fraction as much or more, I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe if you want to see more like it. I have plenty more videos in the oven, even some more long ones like this. Beyond just the YouTube analytics stuff though, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Sonic Adventure or my video itself down in the comments below. I'll try to respond to as many as I can. And of course, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my cool cola crustaceans over on Patreon. Jonas Leschber, Mags' Gaming, Seth Peacock, Dirk Strider, JCKPTH, The Wind is Blowing, David Ramus, and William Hoff. Thank you all for making this possible. I really appreciate your support. And thank you, viewer, for taking some of your valuable time out of your day to listen to me talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. You all have a wonderful rest of your day or night, and I'll see you next time.